She said it while buttering her toast. No eye contact. No pause. No hesitation. Just a casual, butter-slicked, "I'm done," as if she were confirming a grocery list. The knife clinked against the plate. The smell of burnt rye hung between us. I looked at the toast for a second longer than I probably should have. That's how it ended. Not with a fight. Not with a tear. Just a crunch. I didn't ask why. I didn't deserve a reason. I'd figured that out months ago, maybe years. You don't ask the executioner why the blade is sharp. You just notice he stopped wearing a mask. She slid a thick manila envelope across the table. Divorce papers. Ink still wet. She must have printed them overnight. She even pre-highlighted the clauses for convenience. Property. Cars. Retirement. My pension, 50%. Not a negotiation. A courtesy. Maybe. Maybe not. I folded the papers quietly, no reaction, and said, "I'll be gone by Friday." That was it. No scene. No begging. No last-minute plea for another round of therapy we both pretend to try. But I saw it. The flicker. Her hand paused just long enough above her coffee cup. Muscles tightening in her jaw. She didn't expect that. Not the nod. Not the stillness. Not me. She had rehearsed for chaos. Maybe a smashed mug. Maybe a slammed door. Maybe another long monologue where I asked why I wasn't enough, and she pretended to care. But I'd stopped playing my part. She blinked. Reset her posture. Smiled faintly like she was the calm one. "Well," she said, "I guess that's that." I stood. Pulled my mug closer. Sipped slowly. Yep. She waited for more. Some bitterness. A question. Anything. I gave her silence. I had more to say to the flickering kitchen light above us than to the woman I'd shared a bed with for 23 years. I spent the rest of that day packing in increments. Not like a man who was leaving his life, like a man who was collecting tools for something new. My notebooks, my pens. The compass my father gave me. A box of matches I bought at a gas station in 2004. The knife I used to carve our initials into that maple tree outside our first cabin. Ironically, the only real thing that ever lasted between us. She didn't ask what I was taking. She watched from the hallway like a stranger monitoring a tenant's exit. We used to share a closet. Now she barely shared oxygen. On Thursday night, she asked if I'd take the Subaru or the truck. I told her I'd take the truck. It was older, louder, easier to fix, more honest. Friday morning, I left before sunrise. No kiss goodbye. No last look. The air smelled like wet pine. I didn't even glance at the house. Just backed out slow. The tires grumbled against the gravel like they understood. The funny part? I wasn't angry. I felt clean. Like I'd finally taken off a jacket that hadn't fit in years. And Susan? Susan watched me from the upstairs window. Thought I didn't notice. Maybe she expected me to wave. But I didn't. I just drove away. Because when someone throws you out like a forgotten sock, the last thing you do is leave a thank you note. The truck engine coughed once, then caught with a low growl that rolled down the empty street like a warning. 5:13 a.m. The porch light still buzzed behind me. She always left it on, though she hadn't stood on that porch for years, not even to say goodnight. This time, it was just there. Like the marriage, left on out of habit, not hope. I took only what mattered. A canvas duffel. My tools. 2 flannel shirts. The old Leica camera she once called a useless relic. It still worked. Unlike us. The rest? Left behind. Not out of kindness, out of calculation. I didn't leave a note. Not even a post-it. I figured she'd rather fill in the blanks herself. That's what she was best at. Anyway, writing versions of the truth that kept her the victim. The first sign something was off came when she tried to call her sister that afternoon and heard. This number is no longer in service. The landline had canceled. The one in both our names, but under my plan. I'd killed it before the sun came up. The second sign came when she tried to book a massage and her card was declined. She assumed it was the spa's system. Called the bank. The joint account? Drained. Not illegally. Not spitefully. Just methodically. My paychecks, my deposits, I moved them weeks ago. The rest? Half, exactly. Transferred at 4:01 a.m. through a process I'd rehearsed silently like a ritual. She stared at the balance. 1 number. 2 decimals. Nothing else. The house was in her name, sure. But the bills weren't. The insurance, the utilities, even the damn trash pickup, they were mine. On paper. And now? Erased. Susan didn't say anything for 3 days. Not to her friends. Not to the neighbors. Not even to herself, at least out loud. But the signs were there. She started watching the driveway from the kitchen window, pretending to clean the same countertop over and over. She unplugged the cable box twice and called the technician claiming a signal issue, though what she really wanted was a familiar voice that didn't belong to an empty house. By Sunday, Mrs. Kellerman from next door had knocked twice. First, to ask where I was. Second, to deliver a pie and a question she wrapped in syrupy concern. Is everything all right, dear? Susan smiled, rehearsed. Harold's just taking some time. You know, he's always been a bit dramatic. She was trying to play cool, but I knew the look that followed because I've seen it in mirrors. The flicker of something slipping out of your grasp that you didn't think could move on without you. She spent Monday tearing through the file cabinet. My records? Gone. My passport, birth certificate, even the spare keys I never used? All removed. Like I'd vanished, not left. Like I was never there to begin with. But the cruelest cut? I didn't even change the locks on her. I just walked out of the life she thought she still owned. The house was hers, yes. But the soul in it, the routine, the presence, the partnership, the background hum of another human being breathing beside you, that was all me. And now it was gone. She could still sit in the kitchen, drink her wine, and spin her rehearsed version of events for anyone willing to nod politely. But the silence would get louder. It always does. And when it does, the truth echoes hardest against the walls you claimed as yours. It was a Thursday when the message came in. Susan was microwaving leftover salmon, scrolling mindlessly, half watching a rerun of Grey's Anatomy, the one where Meredith finally snaps and walks into the ocean. Poetic, really. She was about to delete a batch of promotional emails when her phone buzzed again. Cheryl, isn't this your Harold? Flush face. Attached, a screenshot. Instagram. Harold tagged in a photo, standing on a ridge above a pine-drenched valley, sun painting the side of his face gold. He looked not younger, not surgically rejuvenated, just alive, a real smile. Not the tight-lipped, dead-eyed grin he gave at their last anniversary dinner. But what stopped Susan cold was the woman standing next to him, laughing, arm hooked into his like it had always belonged there. Marianne. It didn't hit her like a punch. It hit like a memory she'd buried under 6 feet of smog. Marianne. The quiet one. The architecture in turn Harold used to mentor years ago, back when his firm still mattered and he still came home talking about blueprints and rivets with actual enthusiasm. Marianne with the watercolor tattoos and thrift store boots. The one Susan accidentally called Margaret for 6 months. The one she once described, at a dinner party, as a sweet little charity case. Loud enough that Marianne had heard. She'd hated how Marianne made Harold light up. Hated how he listened when she spoke about community design and urban renewal, like it mattered. Like she mattered. So Susan did what she always did when something made her uncomfortable. She smiled and gutted it from the inside. She remembered how she dropped subtle hints to HR about impropriety, how she encouraged the firm's partners to see Marianne as a distraction, not an asset. She told Harold, once, while sipping a martini, "You're wasting your time mentoring girls who will never last in the industry." And when Marianne left the firm quietly, Harold never said a word. And now, they were in the mountains together? She zoomed in on the photo, scanning for any subtle tells. Matching bracelets. A blanket tucked under his arm. Her red thermos, the one she saw once in their garage, years ago, before it disappeared without explanation. The one Harold claimed he tossed. Her skin prickled. She opened Harold's profile. Sparse. Only 4 photos. All nature shots, all recent. Nothing with his face, except that one. The one Marianne posted. Her account was public. Rookie mistake. Susan scrolled. Campsites. Lakes. A tiny cabin with a red porch swing. Books spread across a wooden table, half of them ones Harold used to keep in the attic. His old copy of The Fountainhead, dog-eared at the same place. They weren't just seeing each other. They were rebuilding. With the pieces Susan thought she'd buried under years of indifference. She tried to text Cheryl back. Yeah, I guess so. But her hands were shaking. Suddenly, the silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was hostile. It pressed in, mocked her. The toast crumbs on the counter felt like relics of a life she no longer owned. She got up, poured wine, sat back down. and realized Marianne had never needed revenge. She didn't post that photo for Susan. She probably hadn't thought of Susan in years. That's what stung most. The fact that Harold had. He found the one person Susan made sure he couldn't keep. And somehow, he brought her back. From dismissed in turn, to haunting proof that Susan hadn't just lost her husband. She lost the version of him that smiled. The first time she dialed his number, her finger hovered a second too long before hitting call. Not out of fear. No, Susan didn't do fear. At least not the kind you admit. But somewhere deep in her gut, beneath the Chardonnay and curated confidence, something twitched. Call failed. Signal issue. She tries again. The ringtone echoes twice. Then voicemail. You've reached Harold. If it's urgent, leave a message. If it's not, why are you calling? The same dry tone he always used. But now it sounded like a dare. She inhales, clears her throat, presses record. Harold, it's me. Look, we need to talk. I saw the photo, and I just think there are things we should clear up. I deserve. She stops herself, rewinds. I think it would be healthy for both of us to talk. Soon. She hangs up, checks the timestamp. 8:04 p.m., perfectly reasonable. No desperation, just composed concern, wrapped in passive-aggressive ribbon. She waits. That night. The next day, nothing. By Monday, she tries again. Same result. Voicemail. She doesn't leave one this time. By Wednesday, she sends a text. Harold, can we talk? No bubbles. No dots. No typing. Just a blank screen. On Thursday, after a restless night filled with phantom footsteps and imagined doorbells, she tries once more. Please. At 3:14 p.m., he replies. One word. Why? That's it. No punctuation. No formality. No breadcrumbs. Just a surgical response that slices through her last illusion of control. For a split second, her chest tightens. Not with heartbreak. She was never the bleeding type. But with the cold dread that comes when you realize the person you used to sculpt like clay now sees you as background noise. She doesn't reply right away. She wants to craft something sharp, something leveling. But everything she types sounds pathetic in the blue bubbles. You owe me that much. Delete. Because we mattered once. Delete. I need closure. God, no. She locks her phone, opens the fridge, closes it again, paces. All day, her mind scrambles for angles. How to reel him back in. Guilt? Nostalgia? Leverage? But she finds herself stuck. Because Harold didn't leave angry. He left done. And that was the difference. Anger is reactive. Anger can be manipulated. But indifference? Indifference is a locked door on a burning bridge. It doesn't scream. It doesn't chase. It just lets you watch the smoke. By Friday, she stopped pretending it's about closure. What she really wants is to feel that she still matters. That there's one corner of his mind that hasn't been disinfected of her memory. But all she gets is silence. And the word why, burning in her pocket like a lit match she can't drop. Because deep down, she knows that wasn't a question. It was a mirror. She told herself it was just a drive. Just a scenic detour. The coordinates had taken a week to pry out of Mark Fisher, the neighbor 2 houses down, the one Harold used to talk to over the fence about firewood and engine oil. She'd accidentally run into him at the post office and dropped Harold's name with just the right amount of disinterest. Smiled like she didn't care. Laughed like she hadn't Googled every logging road between Bend and the Canadian border. Mark cracked after 2 minutes. Retirees never hold under pressure. It's way out in the Cascades, he'd muttered, stuffing his mail deeper into his coat. Pretty remote. You won't find it on any listings. Something private he built a while ago with someone else. He didn't have to say the name. Susan already felt it like gravel under her skin. So now here she was, 3 hours northeast, tires spitting dirt, trees pressing in like watchmen. A narrow road. No signage. Her Range Rover looked out of place, like a surgeon in a dive bar. She rehearsed her lines on the way. Civil, casual, concerned. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I didn't realize how serious you were. Maybe we both moved too fast. But the closer she got, the thinner the words felt. Like they dissolved the second she said them out loud. Around a bend, the forest opened briefly, just enough to glimpse it. The cabin. It wasn't rustic like she imagined. It was deliberate. Designed. Stone foundation. Metal roof. A red porch swaying slightly in the breeze like it had been waiting for her. 2 chimneys. And most unsettling, fresh smoke curling from one. They were home. A black gate blocked the final 100 yards of the drive. Simple. Clean. Electronic. With a keypad. She rolled down her window, stomach now firmly knotted, and pressed the call button. Nothing. She tried again. This time, a voice crackled, low, unreadable. Who is it? She swallowed. It's Susan. Pause. Then, a soft click. The gate creaked open like a sigh. So they knew she was coming. She eased through, slowly, gravel popping under her tires. Every nerve in her arms buzzed. Her fingers gripped the wheel harder than necessary. She passed a small garden, herbs, maybe. Someone had been watering. A canoe leaned against the shed, Harold's old model, patched with a resin she once ridiculed as midlife crisis glue. She parked, but didn't kill the engine. You can still turn around. Say you got lost. Say it was an accident. But accidents don't wear lipstick and a hand-pressed wool coat. Accidents don't beg neighbors for coordinates and drive 3 hours through switchbacks. She stepped out. The air was colder than she expected, but she didn't shiver. She walked up the porch steps, heels tapping once, twice. A yellow light flickered behind the window. She heard laughter. Not loud, but warm. Familiar. That low, chest-deep chuckle Harold used to have before everything became sharp between them. She hesitated at the door. Then, without knocking, she opened it. Because after all this time, after the silence, the photo, the single-word text, Susan had told herself this wasn't about power anymore. It was about history, the kind that couldn't be rewritten without her. But as the door creaked open, and that scent hit her, cedar, fire, and something floral that didn't belong to her shampoo, Susan felt it in her chest. This wasn't her chapter anymore. She was trespassing in a story that had already started without her. The heat hit her first, dry and immediate, like stepping into a memory that didn't want her back. The cabin was warm, not just from the fire, but from something deeper. It had a lived impulse. The kind of warmth that came from hand-picked things, wool blankets tossed carelessly over armchairs, mugs that didn't match but somehow belonged together, music playing low from a speaker tucked between bookshelves. And then, there was the smell, pine, citrus, wine, and something faintly sweet she couldn't place. Susan didn't belong in this place. That much was immediate. Harold was sitting on a leather armchair near the fireplace, one leg crossed over the other like he'd been there for hours, not minutes. A book open on his lap. But he wasn't reading. He was watching her. Not coldly. Not kindly. Just watching. Across the room, Marianne stood near the small kitchen island, pouring 2 glasses of red wine. She didn't flinch at Susan's entrance. Didn't raise an eyebrow. Didn't smile. Her laugh, light and effortless, lingered from whatever conversation had just ended. It echoed off the stone fireplace like it belonged there. Susan opened her mouth, something halfway between outrage and performance forming in her throat. But before the first syllable could escape, Harold spoke. Evening. Calm. Steady. Not surprised. Not welcoming. Just a single word that stripped every script Susan had rehearsed clean from her mind. She took a step forward, suddenly hyper-aware of her own breath fogging in the entryway. The fire cracked. The walls didn't echo. The room didn't react. Her gaze shifted to the fireplace. Above it, the mantel. Photos. Not many. 3 or 4 in wooden frames. A hiking trail. A lake. A candid of Harold, squinting into sunlight, Marianne laughing beside him, wind in her hair. But it was the last photo that made Susan's chest tighten. It was an old picture. A family shot. Christmas, maybe 7 years ago. The living room from their old house. She recognized the furniture, the painting they never agreed on, even the sweater Harold wore that year. But something was off. She moved closer. Squinted. She was gone. No, not gone. Removed. Her outline was faintly visible. Cropped. The edge of her shoulder still ghosting in the corner. Like someone had cut her out with a blade but didn't bother replacing her. It wasn't a new photo. It was her photo, sliced and reframed. Hung above a fire she didn't light. In a house she didn't know. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't reach for it. Touching it would admit it mattered. Cozy, she muttered instead, glancing around. You've made yourself comfortable. Harold didn't answer. Marianne walked past her and set the wine glasses down, one in front of Harold, the other beside her own chair. Not 3 glasses. 2. Susan shifted. No wine for your guest? Marianne met her eyes for the first time. You're not staying long. No malice. No insult. Just fact. Susan's laugh came out thin. Wow. Straight to the point. Harold tilted his head slightly, like he was watching a scene he'd already seen play out a dozen times. His fingers turned the page of the book on his lap, though his eyes never left her. She took another step forward, then stopped. The cabin wasn't big, but it felt like crossing a courtroom. So this is it, she said, forcing lightness into her voice. Cabin in the woods. Fresh air. Wine. Cozy fireplace. Her. Still no reaction. She stared at him. Nothing to say to me? He closed the book. Finally. You said we needed to talk. So talk. But she couldn't. Not really. Because the man across from her wasn't the one she remembered, bent and quiet, collecting her moods like unpaid debts. This man didn't owe her anything. She looked around one last time. The details stung more than the silence. A throw pillow she once donated to Goodwill now back in place. A mug from their Paris trip, but it sat beside Marianne's chair. Her memories. Rewritten. And above it all, that photo. The family snapshot edited. Not forgotten. Erased. Marianne hadn't spoken since offering her that curt, "You're not staying long." But now, with the fire casting shadows across the floor and Susan still frozen beneath the mantel, she turned with surgical timing. "Oh, you're Susan." Not a question. A confirmation. The kind of tone used when you finally see the smudge on the glass you've been cleaning for years. Susan straightened, instinctively. Her chin lifted, a practice tilt perfected through years of charity galas and board dinners where image was currency. But the armor didn't land the same here. Not with pine floors and smoke curling in the rafters. "I didn't realize you two were." Marianne raised a hand. Not dramatically. Just enough to cut her off mid-air. "He told me everything. Eventually. There it was. Everything." The word hit like a brick wrapped in velvet. Not shouted. Not weaponized. Just delivered. And somehow that made it land harder. Because if Marianne knew everything, then Susan couldn't hide behind rewrites anymore. Her mouth opened, ready to spin something that sounded gracious, wounded, evolved. But nothing came out. Because what could she say? "Sorry I tried to kill your career with rumors and fake smiles? Sorry I called you Harold's little work crush in front of the partners? Sorry I told him you were a child in combat boots who'd be gone in 6 months?" She had spent years controlling the narrative, spinning, framing, editing. Her version of Harold's past had always included redactions, footnotes, selective emphasis. Her story was the one that survived their dinner parties, their vacations, their arguments. But now, that past wasn't hers anymore. Harold had handed it over, piece by piece, to her, to Marianne. Susan shifted uncomfortably, suddenly too aware of the way her heels clicked on the floor. The way the silence didn't bend to her. The way Marianne was watching her, not with malice, not even satisfaction. Just quiet confirmation that everything Harold had once held back had finally been set free. "I'm sure he gave you his version," Susan muttered, voice low. Marianne didn't flinch. She picked up her wine glass and sipped, slow. "He didn't need to embellish." Susan tried again, this time with more frost. "Whatever issues Harold and I had were between us." Marianne smiled faintly, but it wasn't warm. It was almost sad. "They were. Until you made me part of them." The room thickened. Even the fire seemed to hush. Susan blinked. She wasn't used to this. She was used to being the whisperer, the one behind the velvet curtain pulling strings no one noticed. She made people feel small without ever raising her voice. She weaponized charity and etiquette with surgical precision. But now she stood in a room where none of that mattered. Where the woman she once dismissed as a passing phase had become the archivist of her own buried sins. She looked to Harold, hoping for a rescue, a softening, even a flicker of the old allegiance. But he was watching Marianne, and he was smiling, not with triumph, with peace. The same peace Susan once stole from him piece by piece. Every critique, every dismissal, every time she rolled her eyes at his dreams until he stopped sharing them. Now he looked like a man who got his breath back after forgetting what air even was. Susan's chest tightened. "I didn't come here for this," she whispered. Marianne nodded. "Then maybe you shouldn't have come at all." That line didn't sting because of what it said. It stung because of how true it was. Susan looked around the room one last time and realized this wasn't a battlefield. She wasn't the villain or the victim. She was a footnote in a story she no longer authored. Why are you really here? Harold's voice was low but sharp enough to stop the air. Not angry, not mocking, just steady, like a man sharpening a blade without looking up. Susan froze mid-step. Her hand was half raised toward her coat lapel, a nervous tick she hadn't used since college. She let it fall. I told you, she said, reaching for control like it was still hanging within reach. We never got to say everything. There are things unresolved. Harold didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. She tried again. Closure. Clarity. I think we both deserve that. She knew how to say the right words, in the right rhythm, dressed in the right amount of humility to sound gracious. She'd practiced it in mirrors, in charity event bathrooms, in front of men twice her age who confused polished regret with sincerity. But Harold wasn't nodding. Marianne wasn't reacting. They were just watching her, like she was a distant storm neither of them feared anymore. Susan smiled thinly. Look, I'm not here to fight. I just... Harold leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, fingers laced. Or, he said, tone like cool steel, are you just realizing I was the only part of your life that ever meant anything? The words fell like a weight. Clean. Precise. No flourish. Just a strike. Susan inhaled sharply. Her body flinched before her pride could mask it. He hadn't raised his voice. That was what made it hurt more than any accusation could. Because deep down, under the sarcasm and posture, she had wondered. Every time a dinner party turned hollow. Every time her friends grew silent after she left the room. Every time she looked around her now pristine house and heard nothing but the hum of appliances and her own curated loneliness. She had wondered, what if that quiet man with his ugly flannel shirts and slow-burning mind had been the only real thing? And worse, what if she'd broken him not because he failed, but because he succeeded in ways she never understood? She swallowed. Hard. That's not fair, she said, voice cracking slightly. You think I never loved you? Harold didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because love, in her mouth, sounded like something that had been bartered, like loyalty leased by convenience. She looked to Marianne, as if to find some sympathetic crack in her expression. But there was nothing. Just calm observation. As if Marianne had already sat through this play and was watching the actor flub her lines again. You don't get to rewrite history, Susan snapped, a little sharper than she meant. Harold nodded. You're right. That's why I left it behind. The silence that followed was brutal. She couldn't even hear the fire crackle anymore. Just the steady thud of her own pulse in her ears. For years, she'd been the one with the last word. The final cut. The door closer. But now, standing in a home that wasn't hers, between a man she'd discarded and a woman she'd tried to erase, Susan finally saw it. They didn't need to argue with her. They'd already moved on from her. And the only one still trying to rewrite the ending was the character no longer in the script. Susan's hand brushed the doorframe as she turned to go, not for balance, but to feel something solid under her fingers. Anything real. The air outside had turned cold, or maybe it always was. Hard to tell anymore. But before she stepped out, something made her pause. A sound. Subtle. Sharp in its casualness. Laughter. Behind her. The kind that isn't loud but true. Unrehearsed. No edge. No bitterness. Just two people sharing a moment not meant for her. She turned her head just enough to see them. Harold had leaned back in his chair, one hand over his face as he chuckled. Marianne was standing beside him, a half-poured glass of wine forgotten in her hand, laughing too, eyes crinkled, mouth wide open. They looked like a life she didn't recognize. Susan had spent years telling herself Marianne was a phase, a workplace crush, a lapse in Harold's judgment. She convinced herself that by severing them, she'd saved him from himself, from humiliation, from throwing his reputation away on a girl with combat boots and activist dreams. But looking at them now, she saw it. The thing that twisted her stomach and dried her throat. They weren't some rebound reconnection or romantic nostalgia trip. They were whole, without her. Stronger without her. What she once cracked, they had rebuilt, quietly, privately, beautifully. And worse? They had done it without needing her to know. The realization didn't just sting, it carved something open inside her. She didn't miss Harold because of who he used to be. She missed him because he had become someone she never got to see. Someone better. Someone complete. Because while she spent years curating a life of appearances, dinners, golf tournaments, kitchen counters that were never messy, Harold had been rediscovering meaning in solitude, in nature, in someone who believed in him without trying to reshape him. She had spent their marriage editing him, making him smaller, quieter, easier to manage, all under the guise of help. And now, without her, he had grown. She glanced down at the rug by the door. Her boots had tracked in mud. She wanted to apologize for it, but she knew she didn't have the right. She adjusted her coat. Slowly, mechanically, fingers trembling just slightly at the buttons. The thing she couldn't forgive herself for wasn't that she lost Harold. It was that she threw him away. And in doing so, she'd burned the one bridge that ever led to something real. Because deep beneath the shallow victories, beneath every charity chairmanship, every Botox-smooth photo, every brunch where she played queen among the bored and privileged, there had only ever been one part of her life that mattered more than how it looked. The quiet architect with hands that smelled like cedar and eyes that saw through her. And now he looked at someone else that way. As the doors swung closed behind her, no one followed. No one called out. She was a shadow in a place where the light no longer reached. Permanent exile. And it wasn't punishment. It was truth. The cabin door creaked open as she reached for it, letting in a rush of cold air and pine-scented wind. She didn't belong in this place. She knew that now. But knowing it didn't make leaving any less humiliating. Susan gripped her purse tighter. One last breath. One last glance. And then, her fingers brushed the edge of the wine glass she'd picked up earlier, mostly for show. She hadn't even sipped from it. It slipped. Slow at first, then fast. The stem hit the floor with a sickening snap, and the bowl shattered, splintering across the wood in jagged, shimmering pieces. The room froze, but not from fear. Marianne didn't flinch. She just watched. Harold didn't even turn his head. Susan stared at the broken glass like it had insulted her personally. The sound it made was sharp and loud, louder than any apology, any monologue, any final word she could have delivered. It was the sound of something irreparable, the sound of a performance ending with no applause. She knelt slightly, instinctively, then stopped. No one moved to help. No one offered a towel, or a kind smile, or even the polite reflex of don't worry about it. Because they weren't worried. And neither was Harold. He didn't sigh. He didn't sneer. He didn't offer her the kind of pity that feels like mercy. He just looked at the shards and then looked at her. Take care, Susan. 3 words. Not bitter. Not hollow. Just final. She opened her mouth, ready to say something. Anything. But what could she possibly say to that? That she was sorry? That she missed him? That the worst part wasn't losing him, it was watching him become more himself without her? No. Because this wasn't her stage anymore. This was a home, not a set. And Harold was no longer playing the part she'd written for him. The fire crackled again. The clock ticked somewhere behind her. Marianne turned back to the counter, poured the rest of the wine into a fresh glass, and took Harold's empty one with casual familiarity. And Susan? She was still standing in the doorway, boots on sacred ground, next to broken glass that reflected her face and shards she didn't recognize. Not a single photo of her in the room. Not a single relic. Not even a trace of the woman she tried so hard to be. She stepped out, finally. Slowly. The wind bit harder now, slicing through the seams of her expensive coat. She reached her car, opened the door, sat down, and stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. And for the first time since Harold left, she didn't see the betrayed wife. She saw the ghost of a woman who once had power and used it to destroy the only real thing she ever had. Not because she was evil, but because she never thought he would leave the script. She started the engine. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. The trees didn't part for her. The road didn't soften. Back inside the cabin, Harold put down his glass, leaned back, and closed his eyes. And the fire kept burning. Her fork stabbed the air like a conductor's baton. Let's all raise a glass. To the people who peaked in college, Sharon said, half drunk and fully smug. The table laughed, some politely, some nervously, but everyone looked at me. Because they knew exactly who she meant. I didn't say a word. Just sliced my steak. Medium rare. Bloody in the middle. Kept chewing like it was just another Thursday. Still running around with those barcodes. Mark? She added, swirling her wine. Meanwhile, Nathaniel just got featured in Forbes again. 3rd quarter in a row. She looked around, inviting validation. That's what real ambition looks like. There it was. The name. Nathaniel. Her ex. The mythical tech god she never quite stopped worshipping. He wasn't just a memory, he was a measuring stick she weaponized. Against me. Against anyone who didn't drive a German car or attend boardroom retreats in Aspen. A few people chuckled. Her old sorority friend Lisa leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded. Swallowed. Dabbed the corner of my mouth with a napkin. Because what none of them knew, what Sharon especially didn't know, was that I wasn't just okay. I was patient. On the far end of the dining hall, a projector screen glowed with the sponsor logo, Blackridge Technologies. Nathaniel's pride and joy. The empire he built from nothing, according to every puff piece article Sharon ever shoved in my face. I watched it flicker between slides. Mission statement. Growth stats. Photos of sleek buildings and VR renderings of future offices. The tagline. Built on precision. Powered by vision. The irony could have knocked over the floral centerpiece. Sharon raised her glass again, forcing her voice to cut through the low hum of dinner chatter. You know what's funny? I told Nathaniel once that you were into logistics. He said, "Oh, so he files invoices while the real work gets done." She doubled over laughing. God, he's so quick. I took another bite. It tasted like victory. Because what she didn't know, what none of them had pieced together in all these years, was that Nathaniel's firm hadn't been built from nothing. It had been scaffolded, quietly, invisibly, on vendors, on supply chains, on people like me. People who don't need to be the face of the operation to control its pulse. She leaned across the table now, emboldened. Mark, I mean this with love. You're a good man, but you're not visionary. You keep the wheels turning. You don't build engines. I smiled then. Just a little. Enough for her to notice. What? She asked. I shrugged. Nothing. I was just wondering how many wheels it takes to hold up a tower built on ego. She didn't get it. Of course she didn't. They never get it. Until the screws come loose and the thing starts swaying. A few alumni from the finance program glanced at me curiously. One of them, Bryce, I think, muttered, "Didn't you used to be at Northline?" I nodded. Weren't they, like, absorbed or something? Something like that, I said. And that's all I gave them. Because this wasn't the place for revelations. This was the place for insults. For polishing the shine on other people's trophies while pretending I'd never even been on the field. That's why I didn't flinch when Sharon ordered another bottle of Cabernet and toasted to exes who aged like wine, while tossing me a look like I was a half-worn shoe she couldn't toss out yet. I didn't react when someone asked her about Nathaniel's latest AI acquisition, and she launched into a breathless TED talk about machine learning like she had coded it herself. I didn't correct her when she got the name of the back-end vendor wrong, because I knew that vendor was mine, had been for 6 years, under a different name. A different face, a different CEO I'd recruited from my poker group, an MIT dropout with a vendetta against Nathaniel and a talent for invisibility. Together, we'd started feeding Blackridge cheap integrations, high margins, seamless automation. And then, without a word, we'd started tightening the noose. So while Sharon gushed about stock valuations and VR platforms that change how humans exist, I flagged the server and asked for the check. Oh, come on. We're just getting started, she said, half pouting. No rush, I said. Just like keeping my logistics precise. She laughed again, too loud. Always the practical one. Not exactly thrilling, but I guess someone has to do the boring stuff. Yeah, someone does. Someone has to know where the cables are buried, who supplies the servers, who owns the licenses for the firmware that holds the whole ecosystem together. Someone has to be okay being underestimated. And tonight, I was okay with that, because tomorrow morning, she'd learn what it means to build an empire on borrowed infrastructure when the landlord finally flips the switch. She kicked off her heels in the hotel hallway like she was shedding a costume. The same heel she used to jab into my shin under the table when she thought I was talking too much, too slow, or just not like Nathaniel. God, I forgot how fun those things were, she slurred, fumbling with the keycard. It took 3 tries before the lock clicked green. She waltzed in like she owned the place. Like I hadn't paid for the room. Like I hadn't paid for the flights, the reunion tickets, the dress she picked out and said, "This will make Nathaniel jealous. He always liked me in green." I didn't argue. Just watched her peel back the curtains and marvel at the city skyline. Like it hadn't changed in a decade. You know, she started, turning toward me with a glass of minibar whiskey that no one drinks unless they're trying to make a point. You're a good man, Mark. You are. Steady, predictable, polite. Honestly, you'd make a great neighbor. I sat on the edge of the bed, unbuttoning my cuffs. A neighbor. She nodded, flopping onto the couch. Yeah, you'd mow your lawn every Saturday. Help the old lady across the street with her groceries. Fix a leaky pipe. But not much else. I waited. She took a dramatic sip, then sighed like she was letting me down gently. You're just not impressive. Not like Nathaniel. He walks into a room, and people know. You kind of blend. That one stung. Not because it was unexpected. Because it was so thoroughly rehearsed. Like she'd been storing that line for years, polishing it, waiting for just the right blend of wine and nostalgia. I nodded slowly. Good to know. She waved a hand. Don't get me wrong. I love you in my own way. But when I think about what I could have had, it's like settling for a parking space when I used to fly private. Classy. By the time I changed into a t-shirt, she was snoring softly, sprawled across the couch like a collapsed tent. Her phone lay on the carpet, screen still glowing. A half-typed text to her sister. He's so dull, it's physically painful sometimes. I picked it up, clicked the screen off, and set it on the nightstand. Then I opened my tablet. VPN, active. Biometric scan, verified. Two-factor authentication ping, cleared. The dashboard opened with a soft chime. Underneath the main screen, a red icon blinked. It had been blinking for 6 months, waiting for confirmation. Waiting for me. I hovered my finger for a second, not out of hesitation, just to let the moment settle. Then I tapped, execute phase 4. The screen flickered, then went black. Commands deployed. Server-side protocols engaged. Redundant suppliers activated. Licensing locks initiated. Far away, in a different time zone, a server cluster rerouted itself. Internal tags shifted. Access logs reflagged. The spine of Nathaniel's empire had just been tranquilized. I closed the dashboard. Opened a secure messenger. Typed a single word. Rothman. Then added. Green light. Pull the tape. Sent. I stared at the message for a moment. Rothman. My old college roommate. The guy Sharon once called a wannabe Bond villain. He worked in quiet corners now, contracting out under pseudonyms, buying low, manipulating quietly. We'd been rebuilding the spine of Nathaniel's operation piece by piece, using trust funds, shell core, and vendor leverage. Not illegal, just invisible. We didn't take the company. We became it. Sharon stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about real ambition. I turned off the light and smiled in the dark. 3 years ago, I stood in a strip mall law office with buzzing fluorescent lights and a receptionist who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The pen I signed with? It was plastic and cracked. The papers? Dry, legal, buried in jargon. The company I bought? Useless. On paper, Brigham Capital Holdings, LLC. It hadn't filed a tax return in 7 years. The last address on record was a burned-out warehouse in Buffalo. But its federal registration? Still valid. Its credit identity? Clean. And most importantly, its history? Forgettable. That's what I needed. Something forgettable. I walked out with the keys to an empty shell and a roadmap no one would suspect. Phase 1 was simple. Brigham began acquiring minor logistics operations. Quiet ones. Companies that didn't have Twitter accounts or corporate mission statements. Family-run outfits that delivered machine parts across state lines or warehoused industrial routers in beige buildings no one noticed. I paid in cash. Used Rothman's trust to front the capital. He made his own kills on crypto back when the rest of us were still mocking Dogecoin. We agreed, no headlines. No mergers. Just disappearances, clean and strategic. Each company had 2 things in common. They worked with Blackridge Technologies. They were pissed about Blackridge's bullying contract terms. Nathaniel's empire had gotten greedy, pushed for net 90 terms, then 120. Forced arbitration. Required infrastructure upgrades at the vendor's expense. So when I knocked, I wasn't just a buyer. I was an exit. They didn't care who Brigham Capital was. They cared that someone had shown up with a check, a promise, and no Nathaniel. Phase 2 came after 6 months of groundwork. We absorbed a medium-sized cloud infrastructure vendor called Wex Home Systems. Wexhome wasn't flashy, but they had two key contracts: internal load balancing for Blackridge's dev servers and offsite redundancy backups for their beta environments. In short, if Blackridge sneezed, Wexhome caught the tissue. We didn't change anything, at least, not yet. But we did start collecting names, access logs, subcontractor tags, licensing expirations. That's when the real asset emerged. A buried ownership clause. Wexhome had retained a 2% stake in Blackridge Technologies from their early integration deal. A handshake equity agreement that was never public. No filings. Just a buried footnote in a supplemental contract. And Wexhome had never exercised the voting rights until Brigham bought them. That 2%? It was laughable to the board. Worthless in isolation. But when paired with a few other tokens purchased slowly, quietly, via shell subsidiaries across Delaware, the Caymans, and one charming LLC filed in Wyoming under the name Blackridge Enterprise, well, the board didn't laugh anymore. Because that 2% had been diluted. The bylaws allowed it. But the rights tied to it? Those were still embedded in old licensing agreements. Ones that hadn't been rewritten since Nathaniel's early funding rounds. Meaning, we didn't need a majority. We needed conditions. And by the time anyone noticed, those conditions had been activated, cross-referenced through IP licensing and key personnel retention clauses we triggered when our shell vendors began exiting their contracts early. Wexhome didn't break the system. It rerouted it. Blackridge's supply chain started experiencing minor hiccups. A crate delayed here. A deployment skipped there. Low-priority stuff on the surface. The kind of friction that gets blamed on bad management or overworked interns. Except it wasn't friction. It was leverage. And it didn't stop at 2%. Because Brigham's acquisitions, now 5, now 10, now 20, weren't just logistics. They were infrastructure. And infrastructure? It's the kind of thing no one appreciates until the floorboards creak. Until the house shifts. Until the foundation reminds you it exists. Sharon had no clue, of course. She still thought holding company meant some guy in a tie hoarding stock options. She still introduced me to people as Mark, my husband. He's in logistics. I was fine with that. Because while she was mocking me for stacking boxes in her head, I was quietly stacking influence, right under Nathaniel's nose. I didn't need Blackridge to collapse in a blaze of scandal. I just needed it to rely on things I already controlled. And then, I'd show them what a nobody with a clipboard could do. Blackridge's headquarters sat like a polished monolith on the edge of the business district, a gleaming tower of tinted glass and titanium confidence. 28 floors of ego and VC money, built on the illusion of infallibility. People walked by and whispered. The media called it the brain of modern logistics. But brains rot fast when blood stops flowing. Nathaniel built Blackridge on blitzkrieg growth. Acquire, dominate, expand. That was his gospel. He didn't care about stability. He cared about optics. New deals every quarter. Big handshakes with defense contractors and telecom giants. Slick decks, louder PR, bolder claims. And underneath it all, my people, my trucks, my firmware patches, my warehouses outside Reno and Montgomery and Lubbock, humming along at 3 a.m., unnoticed. The kind of boring backbone that doesn't make press releases but keeps entire ecosystems breathing. We let him build it tall. Then, 2 months ago, I started pulling bricks from the bottom. Not all at once. Never loudly. Just enough to make the tower wobble. First came the night shift slowdown, an unspoken delay at 2 distribution hubs. Operators were instructed to observe new calibration protocols, which conveniently added a 12-hour backlog. But the kicker? These protocols were real. Signed, time-stamped. Approved by internal systems. Just not by Nathaniel. Then came the device sync conflict. Our cloud partner, acquired last year under Brigham's alias, accidentally downgraded firmware across several smart pallets used in Blackridge's warehousing network. They were flagged as non-compliant by a partner API update that we also controlled. Result? 18,000 mislabeled crates, 3 failed deployments, 2 product recalls, and a brief but highly expensive media fire that Nathaniel tried to extinguish with buzzwords and stress sweat. Meanwhile, his engineers were drowning in data anomalies, glitches in transport handoffs, delayed pings from microservers, No centralized breach. No malware. Just entropy. Entropy we had orchestrated. Every contract he leaned on had a clause. Every integration we built had a kill switch. And we weren't even touching the big stuff yet. We were just making it uncomfortable. And that was the beauty of it. Because Nathaniel couldn't go public with the issue. Doing so would admit vulnerability. Would crater his next round of funding. Would raise eyebrows with regulators who were already side-eyeing his aggressive acquisition tactics. He tried Triov, hired consultants, ran internal security audits, fired 2 division leads. None of it mattered, because the rot wasn't inside. It was underneath. By the time he looked at the floor, we'd already pulled half the beams. He just couldn't see it through all the glass. Sharon, meanwhile, was busy posting brunch pictures, telling her friends about Nathaniel's big defense contract coming up. She even forwarded me a podcast he was featured on, How I Built This, Blackridge and the Future of Smart Infrastructure. I listened to it while reviewing our next move. Phase 5, trigger the redundancy string. 1 vendor exit. 1 critical patch delay. Nothing fatal, but everything cumulative. We didn't want Blackridge to fall in a crash. We wanted it to sink like a luxury yacht with a slow leak. Just enough time for the passengers to realize the life vests were moldy, and the captain was already on a different boat. And that's what Nathaniel didn't understand. Empires don't collapse because of enemies at the gate. They collapse because someone rewired the plumbing and made the water run backward. That someone was me. And the spigot had just started to turn. The call came in just after midnight. Sharon rolled over, groggy, her phone buzzing against the nightstand like it owed someone money. She blinked at the name. Nathaniel. That alone sobered her up. She picked up with her rehearsed, breathy tone. Hey, Nat. Everything okay? But his voice wasn't the smooth, cocksure cadence she was used to. It was clipped, rattled. Is Mark connected to strict systems? There was a pause on her end, then a laugh. That dismissive, nasal snort she'd perfected after years of telling dinner party guests that I worked with trucks and QR codes. Mark? Oh, please. He prints inventory sheets. The man thinks a firmware update is a dental procedure. But Nathaniel didn't laugh. He didn't even breathe. 2 of our partners defaulted on shipments this week, he said. And Strix? They just filed for Chapter 11. Sharon sat up now. Strix? The Strix systems that does your load integration. Did, Nathaniel corrected. Until this morning. She rubbed her forehead. Wait, but you've got redundancies, right? Backups. Nathaniel's silence stretched. Strix wasn't just a partner. They were the glue. They built the translator between our tracking mesh and our legacy ERP. Without it, the new stack's blind. Then recontracted. I tried. The architecture's proprietary. The contracts are under lock. Legal says the IP's buried in 3 holding firms. She frowned. So, Sue, Nathaniel exhaled like he'd already been through the loop. I've got engineers sleeping in the server room and sysadmin's hand-syncing API calls like it's 1998. He paused. Sharon, you sure Mark isn't involved? She scoffed, almost offended. He's still trying to figure out how to unpair the Bluetooth on our living room speaker. But the thing is, even as she said it, something twitched. Something old. Faint. From years ago. A dinner party. Rothman's name. A half-drunk conversation about holding companies. Me, quiet, sketching something on a napkin. She'd rolled her eyes and walked away. At the time, it was nothing. Mark being Mark. Now, though? Now it buzzed. Nathaniel continued. We found metadata inside the last server image from Strix. Embedded naming schema. Tagline, Brigham Tree R3. That rang a bell. Sharon blinked. That did ring a bell. But from where? Is that a Blackridge sub? She asked. It's not on our books. More silence. Sharon's tone softened. Do you think he's doing this to you? I mean, that's paranoid, right? I didn't say that, Nathaniel replied. But if someone is pulling strings, they know the structure. They know where we're weakest. They're not after headlines. They're after process. He hung up. Sharon stared at the ceiling. Inventory sheets. Except I hadn't printed anything at home in over a year. I'd stopped asking her to update the router password months ago. I didn't even argue about the Blackridge sponsorship at the reunion. I just smiled. Quiet. Consistent. Unimpressive. But that was the thing about infrastructure. You never notice it until it stops responding. The next morning, Nathaniel's CTO sent out an internal memo labeled urgent. It flagged 6 points of failure across vendor touchpoints. The root cause was listed as unclear, but one section was highlighted in red. Initial breach appears logistical, not digital. Potential internal manipulation of contracts. Follow paper, not code. That same day, 2 more suppliers froze their contracts citing unforeseen clause violations. By lunch, Nathaniel was on his 3rd Red Bull, screaming into a Slack thread about redundant layers and paper ghosts. And by dinner, someone found an invoice, dated 6 months prior, signed under a Brigham shell, with a Rothman-sourced email. The vendor? Krell Networks, a secondary backup contractor. The invoice description? Termination-ready handover package. Phase 1, silent transition. Nathaniel read it twice. Then he stopped blinking. Because it wasn't sabotage. It was planning. And whoever was behind it had been planning a very long time. The morning hit like a bomb with a Bluetooth chime. Sharon was still in her robe, coffee steaming on the windowsill, when her phone buzzed with the first headline. Then the next. And then 20 more. Breaking, Blackridge Tech CEO faces crisis after sudden collapse of vendor network. Inside the shadow acquisitions, former supply execs tell all. Who is Rothman? The name behind the Blackridge unraveling. She tapped the first article with a shaky thumb. Over the past 8 weeks, Blackridge Technologies has experienced a silent erosion of its logistical backbone, with multiple vendors exiting contracts, declaring bankruptcy, or citing obscure clause violations no one on Blackridge's executive team appears to understand. The opening paragraph burned. The 3rd line stopped her heart. Sources indicate the disruption may stem from a coordinated effort, spearheaded, insiders allege, by former colleagues of CEO Nathaniel Gray's early days, operating under dormant holding companies, shell vendors, and long-dormant equity stakes. She blinked, then reread the byline. By Daniel Rothman. Her jaw locked. That name. That annoying, mousy guy from college. Laughed too loud. Wore thrift store blazers. Ate tuna out of a Tupperware during finals week. Rothman. Mark's roommate. The same Rothman she once called a poor man's Edward Snowden after hearing one of his conspiracy-laced rants about corporate supply chains and silent leverage. Back then, she'd waved him off. You and Mark belong in the same cardboard box of almost, she'd joked. Except at least Mark has a 401k. But now? Now Rothman had a feature spread in Business Forward. With charts, timelines, diagrams of shell company activity, highlighted connections between Blackridge's core architecture and the newly revealed holding company, Brigham Capital Holdings, LLC. The article ran deep. It broke down how Brigham had acquired Wexhome Systems 16 months prior, how Wexhome had quietly absorbed key server contracts, how integration protocols were rewritten, how backups had been rerouted to anonymized cloud clusters now controlled by third-party vendors not on Blackridge's ledgers. It mentioned a slow, methodical remapping of dependency, which rendered Blackridge's operational infrastructure dependent on suppliers it didn't even know it didn't control. It didn't say the name Mark. Not once. But it said Rothman 17 times. And Sharon knew. She clutched her phone, scrolled faster. Clicked the link in the footer, view full contract leak archive. She opened a PDF marked internal access only, a scan of an old invoice, paid in full. The signature block? Illegible. The email on the CC line? m.connors@goldings.co. Mark. Connors was his mother's maiden name. She knew that because it was on the wedding certificate she once used to mock his handwriting. Her hand trembled. She called Nathaniel. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. No answer. She opened her texts. Scrolled up. To that night at the hotel. That smug moment when she'd said, "You're not impressive." Never were. He'd smiled. Not sad. Not defeated. Knowing. It all fell like dominoes. The late nights. The VPNs. The logistics spreadsheets he guarded like they were blueprints to the Pentagon. The random packages he signed for, labeled from companies she'd never heard of. The chessboard had been under her roof the whole time. And now the game was live. Another headline buzzed in. Blackridge stock plummets 18% as shareholders demand explanations. Sharon stared at the photo embedded in the article. Nathaniel, red-eyed, walking out of what looked like an emergency board meeting. Behind him, two men in suits with clipboards. One of them was pointing to a printed org chart with red flags across the vendor names. The caption? Too late to rebuild? Her screen dimmed, but she didn't move. Because Rothman hadn't written that expose to brag. He'd written it to introduce Act 2. And Mark? Mark hadn't gone quiet. He was just letting the noise grow louder until the only sound left was panic. The morning light cut through the hotel curtains like a scalpel, sharp, clean, merciless. Mark opened his eyes slowly, the way a man does when he knows the world outside the covers is screaming. He didn't rush, didn't blink. He reached over, grabbed his watch from the nightstand, and tapped the screen. 7:18 a.m. Right on time. His phone lit up next. Not with one notification. Not 10. 356 missed calls. 77 voicemails. 112 texts. All from some variation of Sharon, Nathaniel, board contact, private number, urgent. He scrolled slowly, lips tugging into something just shy of a smile. The calm of a man who didn't need to guess what happened, because he'd written the script 3 years ago. From behind the bathroom door came chaos. Fists pounding, voice shrill. Mark, open this door right now. He stood, stretched, poured water into the Nespresso, and pressed the brew button like he had all the time in the world. The mechanical hum filled the silence. Another slam. Mark, Nathaniel's company is gone. Do you hear me? Gone. He sipped slowly. Let the bitterness settle under his tongue. They think he hid liabilities. Fake vendors. Ghost contracts. There's an audit. The board's in a meltdown. They want to know who signed the supplier transitions. There's a report going around that names someone tied to you. Mark walked to the door. Not in a rush. Not panicked. He opened it. Sharon stood there, eyes wild, hair frizzed, holding her phone like it might bite her. He called me 7 times, she spat. Nathaniel, he's blaming you. He says you poisoned the pipeline. Mark raised an eyebrow. Poisoned? He said you built it, Mark. He says Rothman's just your face man. What the hell is going on? Mark took another sip. Sounds messy. Sharon blinked like she'd been slapped. Messy? His lawyers are talking criminal concealment. There's talk of clawbacks. SEC filings. Subpoenas, Mark. He walked back toward the desk, picked up his watch, slipped it on. Calm. Deliberate. She followed. Why aren't you freaking out? This is insane. They're collapsing, Mark. Blackridge just froze trading. It's on Bloomberg. Your name's in the leak threads. People are piecing it together. Mark finally looked at her. Are they? His tone was low, controlled, almost entertained. She stared, the color draining from her face. You did this. I didn't swing a hammer, he said. Didn't plan a virus. Didn't write a single expose. He gestured to the coffee. I just brewed a cup. You want one? Mark, she shrieked. He looked her dead in the eye. For 10 years, Sharon, I listened to you compare me to Nathaniel like he was the sun and I was a houseplant. And every time, I smiled. Every time, I stayed quiet. Every time, I played the boring husband. He took another sip. You called me predictable. You called him visionary. And now? The visionary's in a boardroom fighting for his company's life with one hand and fending off federal filings with the other. She shook her head. You planned this. All of it. He shrugged. Did I? Don't play cute with me. Cute. He laughed once. You said I wasn't impressive. Turns out impressive looks a little different when the dust settles, doesn't it? Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, then sat down, as if her legs had simply given up. Another alert flashed across his own phone. Blackridge stock suspended pending investigation. SEC requests CEO to step down during review. Sharon's voice cracked. What happens now? Mark stared at the city through the window. Cars moved like blood vessels. Horns. Life. Business as usual. Except for the few offices where executives were discovering their entire foundation was held together with lies, and the man they underestimated had just flipped the fuse box. He finally answered. Now, he said. Now we find out what happens when you build your castle on someone else's ground. And with that, he went back to sipping his coffee. Still hot. Still bitter. Still perfect. The lobby of the Reunion Hotel buzzed with the kind of tension that didn't need words, just glances. Receptionists typing slower. Guests pausing near the elevators, pretending to check their phones but really watching the spectacle unfold at the far end of the marble floor. That spectacle had a name. Nathaniel Gray. He wasn't the man from the podcasts anymore. Not the visionary in the tailored blazer and bright white smile. No, the man storming through the atrium was red, face flushed, shirt clinging under his suit like it had absorbed panic through the pores. His eyes locked on Mark. And the shouting began. "You son of a bitch." Nathaniel's voice cracked through the air like a gunshot. Guests jumped. Someone dropped the coffee. "You think this is a game? You think you can just burn 10 years of work and walk away sipping espresso?" Mark didn't blink. He stood calm, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a plain manila folder. Nathaniel barreled closer, fist clenched. "You set this up. Brigham Holdings, that's you. Rothman? Just a mask. You're the rot. You're the architect." Mark extended the folder. Nathaniel slapped it out of his hand. Papers exploded across the floor like shrapnel. Signatures. Acquisition chains. Supplier logs. Email transcripts. Shell company filings. One sheet fluttered to rest against Nathaniel's shoe. Wex Home Systems Transfer of Control. Signed. M. Connors. Filed. 18 months ago. Witness. Daniel Rothman. Nathaniel stared. Knees slightly bent. Mouth open. "Go ahead," Mark said softly. "Pick them up." "I brought copies." Nathaniel didn't move. Mark crouched, gathered the documents with surgical precision, held one out. "Here's your golden quarter, Nathaniel. A nice little timeline. Each acquisition. Each supplier you leaned on. Every trust buried in paperwork while you were busy giving TED Talks about innovation." He tapped the last page, then turned it toward him. "This one's my favorite. See the clause? The change of control trigger that rerouted your fallback licensing to a shell in Malta? Yeah, that happened 4 days before you signed your Q3 earnings call. You didn't even read it, did you?" Nathaniel's hand twitched. His lips parted. "I'll bury you," he hissed. "You already did," Mark said, matter of fact. "You just didn't notice where the shovel was." A silence fell over the lobby. Dense. Electric. Nathaniel looked down at the page. His pupils flitted. Names, dates, routing numbers, nested holding firms. Then his hands began to shake. Mark stepped in closer, dropped his voice to a whisper. "You built your house on rented scaffolding, Nate," and then bragged about how tall it was. "Maybe next time, ask who owns the ink before you brag about the pen." Nathaniel stumbled back like the words had weight. "You destroyed shareholder value." "No," Mark cut in. "You outsourced shareholder value. I just read the fine print while you were busy chasing headlines." Nathaniel turned toward Sharon, who had just appeared near the bar. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked around the lobby, eyes darting like a hunted animal. Mark could see it now, the dawning horror, the slow realization that it wasn't some rogue hacker, some cyber terrorist, some competitor. It was the boring guy in logistics, the one his ex used to laugh at behind his back. The man who never fought back because he'd been too busy buying the silence beneath his empire. Nathaniel looked again at the papers, this time holding them with both hands. He scanned the footnotes, the buried LLC names, the subtle arrows Rothman had placed like breadcrumbs. His face paled. Mark leaned in one last time. "You always talked about vision," he said, voice calm as ever. "But you never once looked down." Then he turned and left Nathaniel standing in a pile of proof, knees buckling, future unraveling, trying to comprehend how everything he'd built had already been signed away before the first headline ever hit. The leaked footage hit the internet like a grenade in a porcelain shop. A shaky video, clearly from someone's phone, began circulating among industry insiders, then Reddit, then Bloomberg. It was from the emergency board meeting held at Blackridge HQ 3 days after the collapse began. The audio was patchy, the image pixelated, but the voices? Crystal clear. "What I'm saying is, you're overreacting," Sharon's voice rang through the boardroom speakers. The recording zoomed shakily toward her as she stood at the end of the conference table, hands spread like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. This wasn't sabotage. It's not some covert corporate espionage plot. It's Mark. He's not capable of this. He's just bitter. Jealous. Always has been. Someone off camera asked, and Rothman. A beat. "Well," she stammered, "he's a conspiracy freak. Always thought the world was built on secrets. You're giving these guys too much credit." Cut to another voice, this one cold, tired, and very much not amused. Ms. Gray, we have 7 independent procurement audits showing altered contracts, preloaded exit clauses, and supplier ownership crosslinks to a holding company that began acquiring pieces of our infrastructure 3 years ago. You introduced Nathaniel to several of those vendors. The room fell silent. Someone coughed. And then, SEC filed a priority action request this morning. Preliminary findings show internal negligence. Not fraud, yet, but your husband's, ex-husband's, involvement is being mapped in full. The screen flickered to a PowerPoint still frame. Title: Supplier Chain Fragmentation, a Postmortem. One slide had 4 bullet points. Wexhome acquisition ignored, internal memo November 21st. Vendor exit clauses triggered without redundancy. IP licensing leased without oversight. Holding company beneficiaries unvetted. Beneath it, bold and red. CEO oversight failure confirmed. The leak exploded online. Reddit threads filled with armchair analysts piecing together the web. One tweet with 74,000 likes simply read, Logistics Guy 1. Tech Bro 0. Mark's name wasn't in the filings. Not directly, but Rothman's was. And Brigham. And every single document they'd ever filed, digitally pristine, chronologically perfect, legally bulletproof. By Thursday, Blackridge stock had cratered. Nathaniel had not shown up to his own press briefing. Instead, the board released a 6-sentence statement. Effective immediately, Nathaniel Gray has stepped down as CEO. Blackridge Technologies will cooperate fully with all ongoing investigations. A temporary executive transition team has been appointed. Buried in the same release, almost overlooked, was a single line. We are reviewing the role of former strategic consultant Sharon Gray, who will be cooperating with the SEC as a named witness. Sharon, the one who once laughed into her wine glass and called Mark unambitious. The one who said he'd never come close to Nathaniel's level, now had to sit across from federal investigators and explain why half the contracts signed under her husband's empire had her name in the referral notes. She called Mark that night. 7 times. He let it ring. No voicemail. No message. Just silence. And on the 8th attempt, when she finally texted, "Please, I didn't know," he read it. Didn't respond. Instead, he forwarded the clip from the board meeting to Rothman with a single line. Dominoes falling. Clean so far. Rothman replied 3 minutes later. Very. Her subpoena's real. Nathaniel's counsel jumped ship. It's all lining up. Mark stood at his window, staring at the skyline Nathaniel used to call his. One tower dimmed. Another one flickered. He imagined the corner office on the 27th floor being packed into boxes by interns who suddenly realized the legendary empire they worked for had been balancing on bones. And Sharon? She was no longer whispering mockery at black tie galas. Now she'd be whispering under oath. The house was quiet when Mark walked in. Not the kind of quiet that begged to be filled, but the kind that had finally settled after years of echoes, snide comments, half-hearted apologies, muffled contempt behind walls, and underbreaths. He dropped his keys into the bowl by the door, the same bowl Sharon once mocked for being so suburban. She said it belonged in a Pottery Barn catalog, right next to Men Who Settle. He never got around to replacing it. He liked that bowl. The living room was as he left it, uncluttered, cold, deliberate. The recliner near the window still had the imprint from where he used to sit with a book while Sharon watched those glossy shows about penthouses and yachts. Aspirational trash, he called them once. She corrected him. Motivational. He checked the mail without hurry. Bills. Flyers. A real estate postcard from some smiling stranger promising new beginnings. Then a cream-colored envelope, hand-addressed. No return label. Just Mark. He sat, carefully opened it. The letter was short, blue ink, slightly smudged, as if the hand writing it had trembled. I don't know what was real anymore. I keep replaying our life and wondering where it broke. Did you ever love me, Mark? Or was it all just some long, slow act? Did you wait for me to turn cruel so you could justify the knife? Tell me, was any of it real? He read it twice. No anger in her handwriting, just confusion. Regret that hadn't found a target yet. A woman trying to rewind the story, only to realize she wasn't the author. He folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope. Didn't respond. He walked to his study, once mocked as Mark's little war room, and powered on the desktop. He clicked through folders until he found the alumni group site from college. They'd been pestering him to post an update after the reunion. "Tell us what you've been up to," they wrote. "Share your success story." He hadn't responded. Until now. He typed out a single post. No context. No tags. No photo of him in front of a private jet. No links to my 5 rules for winning in business. Just this. Sometimes you let people laugh. You let them point and nudge and whisper at parties. You let them measure you by what they can see, your car, your title, your silence. And sometimes you let them lose everything, because they never stopped laughing. He clicked post, closed the browser, turned off the monitor. Outside, the neighborhood stirred, lawns being watered, dogs barking in the distance, kids racing on bicycles. The world kept moving. And inside, Mark finally exhaled. Not because it was over, but because he'd never raised his voice. He didn't burn bridges, didn't call lawyers, didn't scream for justice. He let the ink do the talking, the clauses, the contracts, the calendar. And now the silence was his. The kind that didn't ache, the kind that didn't need forgiveness, the kind that felt earned.
Ben and I were sitting in the backyard, just the two of us. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. But all I could hear was his voice. He was laughing as he told me about his day, his soccer practice, his favorite Pokemon cards, normal 12-year-old stuff. And then, completely out of nowhere, he dropped it like it was nothing. "Uncle Michael's cool," he said, twisting a blade of grass in his fingers. "Grandma says he's kinda like my real dad or something. Isn't that weird?" It took a second for the words to register, like my brain had short-circuited. My first instinct was to laugh, like he must have misheard or misunderstood. But the way he said it, so casually, so innocently, left me cold. I forced myself to stay calm, nodding like it was just some kid misunderstanding grown-up talk. "Oh yeah," I asked, keeping my voice steady. "What exactly did Grandma say?" Ben shrugged, not even looking at me. "She just said Uncle Michael and I have a special connection. Like, I look like him or something. It's funny, right? Funny? No, nothing about it was funny." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I grilled burgers. We watched a movie. I laughed when I was supposed to, nodded when I needed to, but my mind was spinning. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to convince myself it was some innocent comment blown out of proportion. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Laura and Michael, they'd always been close. Too close? I hated myself for even thinking it, but once the seed was planted, it grew roots fast. I started piecing together moments I'd never thought twice about. Their shared jokes at family dinners, the way she always seemed to go out of her way to include him, even when it felt unnecessary. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't just suspicious. I was certain. I didn't say anything to Laura that morning. Instead, I told her I had a work meeting and left the house, driving aimlessly until I found myself parked outside a drugstore. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the entrance, debating with myself. Was I really about to do this? Eventually, I got out and bought the damn DNA kit. It felt surreal, like I was starring in someone else's nightmare. When I got home, I told Laura it was a fun project for Ben, a way to learn about his ancestry. She didn't blink. She smiled, even joked about how she hoped he didn't inherit my terrible singing voice. Her calmness was unsettling. The test took a week to process. It was the longest 7 days of my life. I kept watching her, looking for cracks, some sign that she might be hiding something. She didn't give me anything. If she was lying, she was a damn good liar. The results came in on a Monday. I opened the email in my office, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. When I saw the results, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Ben wasn't mine. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen. I think I expected to feel anger, but what hit me first was a deep, hollow sadness. My son, my boy, wasn't mine, and Michael was. It was there in the numbers, undeniable. And then the anger came hot and fast, flooding through me like fire. My brother, my wife, they'd betrayed me in the worst way possible, and they'd done it right under my nose. I took a deep breath, closed my laptop, and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Laura yet. Not until I had a plan. I'd been blindsided once, and it wasn't going to happen again. This wasn't just about me. It was about Ben. About the life I thought I had. And if Laura and Michael thought they were going to get away with this, they were about to find out how wrong they were. The following weekend, I decided to test the waters. Laura and I were hosting a small family barbecue. Nothing unusual, just a casual get-together with Michael, my parents, and a few cousins. It was the kind of thing we'd done 100 times before, but this time everything felt different. I watched them both like a hawk, searching for the slightest crack in their perfect facade. Laura floated around the backyard like the perfect hostess, laughing and chatting with everyone. Michael was his usual self, cracking jokes and charming everyone with that easy grin of his. To anyone else, it was a picture-perfect family gathering. But now, with what I knew, every interaction felt tainted. It was the little things that got under my skin. The way Laura instinctively handed Michael a beer before I even asked for one. The way his hand lingered on her back as he squeezed past her to grab another burger. It wasn't overt. It was subtle, practiced, like they'd done this dance 100 times before. Midway through the evening, I decided to poke the bear. "You know, Michael," I said, keeping my tone light, "Ben's been saying he looks a lot like you lately. Guess the family genes are strong." Huh. The conversation around us paused for a moment, but Michael didn't miss a beat. He laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Well, he's a handsome kid. Can't blame him for wanting to take after his favorite uncle." The others chuckled, and the moment passed, but I didn't miss the flicker of something in Laura's eyes. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Panic. That night, after everyone had left, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Laura," I said, catching her off guard as she loaded the dishwasher, "can I ask you something? And I need you to be honest." She froze for just a second before turning to face me, a cautious smile on her face. "Of course. What's up? Is there something going on between you and Michael?" The question hung in the air like smoke. For a moment I thought she might deny it outright, but instead, she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a sharp, cutting one that made my stomach churn. "Are you serious?" she said, crossing her arms. "You're accusing me of, what, having an affair with your brother? Do you even hear how insane that sounds?" I stayed calm, refusing to let her rattle me. "Ben said something the other day, something about Michael being his real dad. Care to explain that?" Her face paled, but she recovered quickly. "Josh, he's a kid. He doesn't understand what he's saying. He probably overheard some dumb joke or something and took it literally. You know how kids are." Her deflection was good, too good. She was a master manipulator, turning my questions back on me like I was the crazy one. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I didn't press her that night. I knew she'd just dig in her heels and spin more lies. But I also knew I wasn't letting this go. The next morning, I made a call. If Laura and Michael thought they could gaslight me into silence, they were in for a rude awakening. I was done playing games. It was time to take control of the situation, and I had a plan to blow their little secret wide open. But to pull it off, I needed to wait for the perfect moment. And when it came, there would be no escape for either of them. The next step required patience and precision. I couldn't afford a misstep. If I confronted them without solid proof or a plan, Laura would manipulate the narrative, twist it until I looked like the villain, and Michael would charm his way out of it. I needed them to expose themselves. That's when the idea hit me. If their secret had survived this long, it wasn't just because of luck. It was because they were careful. But people slip up when they think no one's watching. I decided to give them just enough rope to hang themselves. It started with a simple lie. That Friday, I told Laura I had a work conference out of town. I made it as believable as possible, fake emails, fake itinerary, even packed a bag. I kissed her goodbye that morning, promising to call in the evening, and left the house. But I didn't go anywhere. Instead, I parked my car a few blocks away and waited. Hours passed. I almost started doubting myself, thinking maybe I'd overplayed my hand. But then, around 2 p.m., I saw it. Michael's truck pulled into my driveway like it was nothing. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him stroll to the front door. Laura opened it immediately, her smile too wide, her body language too familiar. They disappeared inside, and I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. For a second, I wanted to charge in, to blow the whole thing up right then and there. But I stopped myself. If I wanted the truth to come out in a way that left no room for their lies, I had to be smart. I waited 2 hours before driving home. 2 hours of imagining every possible scenario, every whispered conversation, every touch. By the time I opened the door, I was a mess of anger and resolve. Back so soon? Laura called out from the kitchen. She was cool, casual, like nothing had happened. Michael was gone, of course. They'd covered their tracks, leaving no evidence behind. But now I was sure. They were guilty. I played along, acting like I'd forgotten something and canceled my trip. Laura didn't seem fazed. She was a master at this, I realized. A lifetime of lies had made her bold. The next morning, I went to see my parents. I wasn't ready to tell them everything yet, but I needed allies. I casually brought up the idea of hosting a family dinner, framing it as a way to spend more time together. They agreed, thrilled at the suggestion, and I set the date for the following Saturday. This wasn't going to be just a dinner, it was going to be a reckoning. In the meantime, I kept my distance from Laura. I was polite but cold, careful not to tip her off that I knew the truth. She noticed, of course, but every time she asked what was wrong, I brushed her off with vague excuses about work stress. I could see her frustration building, but I didn't care. The week dragged on, but finally, the night of the dinner arrived. Everyone was there, my parents, Laura, Michael, even a few cousins. It was exactly the kind of cozy family gathering we'd always had. Except this time, I wasn't there to celebrate. I waited until everyone had eaten, the wine had flowed, and the mood was light. Then, when the moment was just right, I stood up. There's something I need to say. I began, my voice steady but loud enough to command attention. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I've recently learned something that affects this family. Something that's been kept a secret for far too long. I let the words hang in the air, watching the confusion on everyone's faces. Everyone except Laura and Michael. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my gaze. Laura, on the other hand, stared straight at me, her expression unreadable. It's about Ben, I continued, my voice growing sharper. And his real father. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. My mother froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. My father looked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. What are you talking about, Josh? Laura said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. I ignored her, turning to Michael. Why don't you tell them, Michael? Or should I? Michael's face turned pale, his confident exterior cracking for the first time. Josh, I have no idea what you're talking about, he stammered. Oh, you don't. I pulled out the printed DNA results and slammed them on the table. These say otherwise. Care to explain how my son isn't mine but yours? The room erupted. My mother burst into tears. My father stood up, demanding answers. Laura tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Michael sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked to Laura, who finally snapped. Fine, she yelled, standing up. You want the truth? Yes. Michael is Ben's father. But it doesn't change anything. You're still his dad. You're the one who raised him. The audacity of her words hit me like a slap. It changes everything. I spat. You lied to me. You lied to all of us. And you? I turned to Michael, my voice trembling with rage. You betrayed me, your own brother. How long has this been going on? Michael didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said it all. By the end of the night, the family was shattered. My parents were inconsolable, my cousins furious. Laura and Michael tried to spin their excuses, but no one was buying it. I walked out that night knowing I'd done what needed to be done. But this wasn't over, not yet. I had more moves to make, and by the time I was done, they'd regret every single lie they'd ever told. The house was eerily quiet the next morning. Laura wasn't in bed when I woke up, and for a split second, I thought she might have left in the night. Part of me hoped she had, but when I walked downstairs, there she was, sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in her hands. She didn't look up as I entered. I grabbed a glass of water and stood across from her, waiting for her to say something, anything, but she just sat there, staring into the mug like it held the answers to all her problems. Finally, I broke the silence. So, that's it? You have nothing to say after last night? She looked up at me then, her eyes bloodshot. What do you want me to say, Josh? You already decided how you feel. How I feel? I laughed bitterly. You lied to me for over a decade. You let me believe Ben was my son while you carried on this. Whatever this is with Michael. You don't get to play the victim here, Laura. Her face hardened, the tears drying up instantly. You think this is all my fault? Fine. I made a mistake. But you're not blameless, Josh. You've been so busy with work, so distracted. You didn't even notice what was happening right in front of you. Her words hit a nerve, but I wasn't going to let her twist this around. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. You could have come to me, told me you weren't happy, but instead you chose to betray me with my brother. There's no justification for that. She didn't respond, just stood up and walked out of the room. Michael, on the other hand, wasn't going to get off that easily. I called him later that day, my voice cold and steady. We need to talk, I said. Josh, listen. I know you're upset. Save it. I snapped. You're going to meet me at Dad's house in an hour. No excuses. He tried to protest, but I hung up before he could finish. This wasn't a negotiation. When he arrived, my father was already waiting, his face grim. Michael walked in looking like a shadow of himself. No cocky grin, no easy charm. Just guilt written all over his face. I didn't waste any time. How long? I asked. Michael hesitated, glancing at Dad like he was hoping for some kind of lifeline. He wasn't going to get one. How long? I repeated, my voice rising. 13 years, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a freight train. 13 years. Ben wasn't just a mistake or a one-time lapse in judgment. He was the product of a full-blown affair that had started before he was even born. You were with her while she was pregnant with my child? Dad's voice boomed, shaking the walls. Michael flinched, but he didn't deny it. I leaned forward, my hands clenched into fists. You looked me in the eye at my wedding. You stood there and made a toast, knowing you'd been with her. How could you do that to me? He didn't answer. There was nothing he could say that would make it better. You've destroyed this family, Dad said, his voice thick with anger and heartbreak. Don't you get that? You didn't just betray Josh. You betrayed all of us. Michael opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I don't want to hear it. Whatever excuses you've got, keep them to yourself. Because as far as I'm concerned, you're not my brother anymore. For a moment, I thought he might fight back, but he just nodded, his shoulders slumping like the weight of what he'd done was finally crushing him. When I got home, Laura was waiting for me, sitting on the couch like she knew I was coming for her next. I talked to Michael, I said, my voice cold. 13 years, Laura. 13. Was there ever a moment when you thought about telling me the truth? She looked up at me, her expression defiant. And what would that have done? You would have left, and Ben would have grown up without a father. I did what I thought was best for him. Best for him, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You've built his entire life on a lie. Do you have any idea what that's going to do to him when he finds out? She didn't have an answer for that. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow. For the first time, the color drained from her face. Josh, wait. No, I said firmly. I'm done. You and Michael can have each other, for all I care. But you're not taking Ben. He's my son, whether or not we share blood, and I'm not going to let you or Michael ruin his life any more than you already have. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but she must have seen the resolve in my face, because she closed it again. I walked out of the room without looking back, knowing this was just the beginning. Laura and Michael had built their lives on lies, and now they were going to watch it all come crashing down. The day after I filed for divorce, I began putting the final pieces of my plan into motion. Laura and Michael thought the worst was over now that the secret was out, but they had no idea what I had in store for them. I called my parents one at a time. The betrayal had shaken them to their core, but I needed to make sure they understood the full extent of it. I told them everything. How Laura and Michael had been carrying on behind my back for over a decade. how Ben had been caught in the middle of their lies, how I'd been made a fool of at my own wedding. My dad was livid, his anger practically vibrating through the phone. My mom, meanwhile, was heartbroken. She couldn't stop crying, devastated not only for me but for Ben, who she adored. "We'll stand by you, Josh," my dad said firmly. "Whatever you need, we'll be there." I repeated the process with the rest of the family, cousins, uncles, aunts. Each call was like lighting a match, setting their trust in Laura and Michael ablaze. By the end of the week, I had effectively turned everyone against them. The family they had relied on for years was now completely out of their reach. The silence in the house was oppressive. Laura tried to keep up appearances, acting as if she could somehow salvage her reputation. But every time the phone rang, she would flinch, knowing it wouldn't be for her. Michael, on the other hand, was unraveling. He'd always been the golden boy in our family, the one who charmed everyone, who could do no wrong. Now his phone calls went unanswered, his invitations ignored. Even his job was on shaky ground after I let a few well-placed comments about his questionable morals reach the right ears. I didn't stop there. I sat down with my lawyer to go over the custody arrangements. Laura didn't know it yet, but I had no intention of letting her keep any significant time with Ben. Every piece of evidence of her deceit, every recorded inconsistency, every hint of instability. I compiled it all into a file so damning that when we finally presented it in court, she'd have no ground to stand on. It didn't take long for the pressure to start cracking her polished exterior. One night, as I was sitting in the living room, Laura stormed in, her face red with frustration. "What the hell are you doing, Josh?" she snapped. I didn't look up from the papers I was reviewing. "I'm cleaning up the mess you made. You're turning everyone against me. Against Michael," she shouted. "Do you really hate us that much?" I set the papers down and met her gaze. "I don't hate you, Laura, but I won't let you or Michael walk away from this without consequences. You both made your choices, and now you have to live with them." Her defiance crumbled for a moment, replaced by a flicker of desperation. "You're destroying our family," she whispered. "No, Laura," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You destroyed it the moment you decided to betray me. I'm just making sure you don't get to pretend otherwise." Her face twisted into something between anger and heartbreak, but she didn't say anything else. She just turned and walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The family dinner had been the first shot fired, but this was a war of attrition. Every move I made was calculated, every action designed to chip away at the lives they had built on lies. Slowly but surely, I was dismantling their world, piece by piece. And the best part? They couldn't even see it coming. As the divorce proceedings crept closer, Laura and Michael's desperation became palpable. Laura spent her days pacing the house, alternating between silence and outbursts. Her mask of composure was slipping, and I could see the cracks forming with every passing hour. Michael, on the other hand, was spiraling in a different way. He hadn't shown his face around the family since the dinner, but I heard through mutual connections that his charm had finally run dry. Nobody wanted to hear his excuses anymore. What they didn't realize was that the real blow hadn't landed yet. One evening, as Laura sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone in silence, I casually dropped a grenade into the conversation. "I've been thinking," I said, keeping my tone light. "We should have a proper sit-down with Ben. He deserves to know the truth." Her head shot up, panic flashing across her face. "The truth?" she repeated, her voice unsteady. "About his father," I said bluntly. "No," she said quickly, her voice rising. "No, Josh. He's too young. He wouldn't understand." "Too young?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "You mean too young to realize that the woman he trusts most in the world has been lying to him his entire life?" "Josh, don't," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "He's my son. I won't let you ruin his childhood over your bitterness. You already ruined it." I shot back, my voice cold. "The least you can do now is own up to it." She didn't respond, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew I wasn't bluffing. The next morning, I made good on my promise. I told Laura we were going to sit down with Ben that evening, whether she liked it or not. She didn't fight me, at least not openly, but I could see the gears turning in her head. When the time came, Ben sat at the dining room table, oblivious to the tension in the room. Laura sat next to him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while I stood across from them, my heart pounding. This wasn't going to be easy, but it had to be done. Ben, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. There's something we need to talk about. Something important. He looked up at me, his big, trusting eyes cutting through me like a knife. I hesitated for a moment, but then Laura spoke up, her voice shaky but firm. Ben, sweetheart, she said, forcing a smile. What your dad is trying to say is, well, families are complicated sometimes. I shot her a sharp look, but she ignored me, continuing. And sometimes, there are things we don't talk about because we're trying to protect the people we love. Ben frowned, clearly confused. What do you mean? I didn't give her the chance to spin any more lies. Ben, I said, cutting in. I'm not your biological father. His eyes widened, his mouth opening slightly as he tried to process what I'd just said. What? But, you're my dad, he said, his voice breaking. I am, I said quickly, kneeling beside him. I will always be your dad. That will never change. But there's more to the story, and you deserve to know the truth. Laura tried to interrupt, but I silenced her with a glare. The truth, I continued, is that Uncle Michael is your biological father. The room fell silent. Ben looked between us, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and betrayal. Finally, he turned to Laura. Is that true, Mom? Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. But it doesn't matter, Ben. Your dad loves you more than anything in the world. That's what matters. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice trembling. Why did you lie? We didn't want to hurt you, Laura said, reaching for him. But he pulled away, his eyes welling up with tears. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. But I knew better than to make promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I let the moment hang, giving him the space to process what he'd just learned. Laura stormed out of the room, muttering something about me being cruel and unforgiving. But I didn't care. The truth was out now, and there was no taking it back. That night, as I tucked Ben into bed, he turned to me with tear-streaked cheeks and asked, Do you still love me, Dad? I felt my heart break all over again. More than anything in the world, I said, pulling him into a hug. That will never change. Ever. It was the truth, and I would spend the rest of my life proving it to him. But for Laura and Michael, the fallout was just beginning. They had spent years building a house of cards, and now that it had come crashing down, they had nowhere to hide. And I wasn't done yet. In the days that followed, the fallout of the truth became impossible for Laura and Michael to contain. The rest of the family, already seething from the revelation at the dinner, now had Ben's shattered innocence to fuel their anger. What little sympathy Laura might have clung to evaporated when people saw the effect her lies had on my son. My parents, usually the peacemakers, were unrelenting. My father refused to speak to Michael, calling him a disgrace to the family. My mother, who had always been close to Laura, now barely looked at her when we crossed paths during custody handovers. Even Laura's own parents, who had initially tried to defend her, were now avoiding her calls. I had taken Ben to stay with me full-time while we navigated the custody process. Laura didn't dare fight me on it, not with the evidence I'd gathered and the public opinion turned against her. Still, I knew her silence wouldn't last forever. She was too manipulative to give up without a fight. And then, she made her move. One evening, just as I was helping Ben with his homework, I got a call from my lawyer. His voice was calm but serious. Josh, I just received a petition from Laura's attorney. She's filing for joint custody, citing emotional manipulation on your part to alienate her from Ben. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but my lawyer didn't share my amusement. It's a common tactic, he said. She's trying to paint herself as the victim. We'll need to counter it carefully. Do you have anything else we can use to establish a pattern of her behavior? I thought for a moment, my mind racing. Laura's lies and deceit were obvious to me, but I needed something undeniable, something that would hold up in court. And then it hit me, the texts. Over the years, I had always assumed Laura and Michael's close relationship was nothing more than sibling-in-law camaraderie. But now I wondered, if they had been so brazen as to carry on an affair for years, there was a good chance they had left a trail. That night, after Ben had fallen asleep, I dug out my old laptop and opened up the backups of our shared phone accounts. Laura had long since deleted the incriminating messages from her phone, but she had underestimated my habit of keeping records. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The messages weren't just casual, they were explicit. Years of flirtation, hidden rendezvous, and emotional confessions spilled across the screen. They spoke of their plans, their lies, and even moments when they mocked me for being too blind to notice. One message from Michael stood out above the rest. Josh will never know. He's too busy playing the perfect husband to realize what's right under his nose. I stared at the screen, my rage boiling over. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had mocked me, used me as a cover for their selfishness. The next day, I handed everything over to my lawyer. The texts were a goldmine, not just for the divorce but for the custody battle. They painted Laura as reckless, deceitful, and unfit to have any significant role in Ben's life. When Laura found out I had the messages, her reaction was explosive. She showed up at my house unannounced, banging on the door and shouting until I let her in. "How dare you dig through my private messages?" she screamed, her face red with fury. "How dare you betray me with my own brother?" I shot back. "You don't get to play the victim here, Laura. Not anymore." Her anger turned to desperation. "Josh, please, don't do this. Think about Ben. He needs his mother. He needs a stable, honest home," I said coldly. "Something you're incapable of providing." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of pity. She had made her choices, and now she was reaping the consequences. By the time she left, I felt the weight of years of lies lifting off my shoulders. For the first time, I knew I had the upper hand, and no amount of manipulation from Laura or Michael could change that. The custody hearing was set for the following month, and I was ready for it. But I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting to ensure that Laura and Michael's lies never had the chance to poison Ben's life again. And as I prepared for the battle ahead, one thought kept me focused. They had underestimated me for too long. That mistake would be their undoing. The custody hearing was scheduled for a crisp autumn morning. I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer, a thick binder of evidence tucked under his arm. Laura was already there, sitting with her attorney. She looked polished and composed, but her eyes betrayed her, darting around nervously, avoiding mine. Michael wasn't with her. He knew better than to show his face here. The room buzzed with quiet tension as the judge entered, and the hearing began. Laura's lawyer went first, spinning a tale of a devoted mother torn apart by a vengeful husband. He painted me as overbearing, manipulative, and spiteful, a man determined to alienate his son from his mother. Laura dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of a wounded victim to perfection. Then it was our turn. My lawyer wasted no time dismantling their narrative. He laid out the timeline of Laura's affair with Michael, emphasizing its duration and the level of deceit involved. The DNA test results were presented as undeniable proof of their betrayal, followed by the damning text messages. Each message felt like a knife twisting deeper into Laura's carefully constructed image. "Josh will never know," my lawyer read aloud, pausing for effect. "He's too busy playing the perfect husband." He looked up at the judge. "This is not the behavior of a mother prioritizing her child's well-being. This is a calculated pattern of deceit and betrayal." Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her polished mask beginning to crack. Then came the most critical moment. My lawyer called me to the stand. "Mr. Harper," he began, "why are you seeking full custody of your son?" I took a deep breath, meeting the judge's eyes. "Because I want Ben to grow up in a stable, honest home. He's been caught in the middle of a web of lies, and I can't allow that to continue. He deserves better." "And do you believe Mrs. Harper is capable of providing that stability?" "No," I said firmly. "Laura has proven time and again that she's willing to lie, manipulate, and put her own interests above everything else. I can't trust her to prioritize Ben's needs." When it was Laura's turn to take the stand, her composure crumbled. My lawyer pressed her about the affair, the lies, and the text messages, leaving her flustered and defensive. She tried to deflect, claiming she had acted out of fear and love for her son, but the judge didn't look convinced. By the end of the hearing, the outcome was clear. The The judge ruled in my favor, granting me full custody of Ben. Laura was given limited visitation rights, but only under strict conditions. The victory was bittersweet. I didn't relish the thought of keeping Ben from his mother, but I knew it was the right decision. He deserved a fresh start, free from the toxic influence of Laura and Michael's lies. When we left the courthouse, Laura caught up with me in the parking lot. Her face was streaked with tears, her voice desperate. "Josh, please," she begged. "Don't do this. I'll change. I'll be better. Just give me another chance." I stared at her, my heart heavy. For a brief moment, I thought about the woman I had married all those years ago, the woman I thought I knew. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't trust. "It's too late, Laura," I said quietly. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She crumpled, sobbing, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked away, knowing there was no turning back. At home, Ben was waiting for me. When I told him the news, he hugged me tightly, relief washing over his face. "Does this mean we'll be okay, Dad?" he asked. I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, kiddo, we're going to be just fine." But even as I reassured him, I knew the fight wasn't completely over. Laura and Michael had underestimated me once, and I wouldn't give them the chance to do it again. I had taken the first step in rebuilding our lives, but there was still one final move to make, the one that would ensure they felt the full weight of their actions. And when that moment came, it would be devastating. In the weeks following the custody ruling, the atmosphere around Laura and Michael became one of total isolation. The family network they had leaned on for years was gone, cut off like a dead limb. Even the few mutual friends who had initially tried to stay neutral began to distance themselves as more details of their betrayal came to light. Laura had moved out of the house and into a small apartment across town. I knew from the grapevine that her financial situation was dire. Court fees, legal bills, and the loss of my financial support had hit her hard. Michael wasn't doing much better. His reputation had taken a massive hit, even outside the family. He'd lost clients at work, and word had it that his employer was starting to question his reliability. But I wasn't done yet. The thing about betrayal is that it festers, and the longer it goes unaddressed, the deeper it infects. I wanted them to feel every inch of the devastation they had caused, not out of spite, but to ensure they couldn't just brush this off and move on like nothing had happened. It started subtly. I had gathered so much evidence during the divorce and custody battles, texts, emails, even receipts from their hidden rendezvous. I compiled it all into a neat little package, leaving out any details that would harm Ben but ensuring it was damning enough to expose the full extent of their affair. Then, I anonymously sent it to a few key people, Laura's parents, Michael's boss, and even a local community group Laura had been involved in for years. The fallout was immediate. Laura's parents, who had been clinging to the hope that she was just misunderstood, cut off contact with her completely. Michael's boss called him into a meeting, where he was put on probation pending an internal review. And as for the community group, they quietly removed her from all upcoming events, citing a need for leadership accountability. The most satisfying moment came at a family gathering, one that neither Laura nor Michael were invited to, of course. My mother, usually reserved and diplomatic, spoke up in front of everyone. "Josh, you did the right thing," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We all trusted them. We welcomed them into our lives, our homes, and they betrayed all of us. This family is stronger without them." Her words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement. Even the relatives who had once adored Michael now spoke of him with disdain. Still, I knew that Laura and Michael were too cunning to stay down for long. They'd find a way to spin their narrative, to paint themselves as victims if given the chance. That's when I decided to make my final move, a quiet but irreversible blow. Michael had always been meticulous about his reputation. He cared about appearances, about being seen as the golden child who could do no wrong. So I reached out to a lawyer specializing in defamation and reputation management. Together, we filed a civil suit against Michael, not for the affair itself, but for the psychological and emotional damage his betrayal had caused to both me and Ben. The evidence I had collected painted a damning picture, and Michael knew he couldn't fight it without dragging himself further into the mud. Instead, he settled out of court, agreeing to a hefty payout that I immediately funneled into a trust fund for Ben's future. The settlement was the final nail in the coffin. Michael's finances took a major hit, and word of the lawsuit spread quickly, cementing his fall from grace. As for Laura, she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She tried reaching out to Ben a few times, but he was hesitant, confused by everything that had happened. I didn't discourage him from maintaining a relationship with her, but I made it clear that he didn't owe her anything. One night, as I sat on the couch watching TV, Ben came over and sat beside me. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think things will ever go back to normal?" I paused, thinking carefully before answering. "No," I said honestly, "but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Normal wasn't what we thought it was. Now we get to make something better. Just you and me." He smiled, leaning against me as we watched the show. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Laura and Michael had underestimated me, thinking I would fold under the weight of their betrayal. But instead, I had taken everything they valued and turned it against them. They were left with nothing but each other, and I had built a new life with Ben, free from their lies. The revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, calculated, and complete. And it was exactly what they deserved. It's been a year since everything fell apart, and life looks very different now. Ben and I have settled into a new routine, one built on honesty and trust. He still struggles with the weight of what happened. What kid wouldn't? But he's resilient, stronger than I could have imagined. As for Laura and Michael, they've faded into the background of my life. Michael moved out of town, and Laura remains a ghost in Ben's life, limited to the occasional supervised visit. They're not the power players they once thought they were. Their choices cost them everything: family, respect, and even their own sense of pride. For a long time, I wrestled with bitterness. I wanted to hate them, to cling to the anger, to keep the fire of revenge alive. But one day, as I watched Ben playing in the backyard, laughing with a friend, I realized that letting go wasn't about them. It was about me. Men of my generation grew up with a code: loyalty, hard work, sacrifice for the family. We believed in those things because they anchored us, gave our lives meaning. And when that foundation is ripped out from under you, it's easy to feel lost, to believe that you've failed. But here's the truth I've learned through all of this: betrayal doesn't define us. How we rise from it does. I lost a brother. I lost a wife. But I didn't lose myself. I didn't lose the principles that kept me steady through the storm. And I didn't lose my son, the only thing that truly matters in the end. For any man reading this, let me leave you with this: don't let someone else's betrayal rob you of your worth. You are more than their lies. You are more than their mistakes. And no matter how devastating the loss, you can rebuild. I did. Ben looks at me now with trust in his eyes, not because I'm perfect, but because I never gave up on us. And that's what I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.
I sat in the dark, lights off, dinner untouched, watching the hallway clock tick past 11. She was late again. 3 hours late. And no call, no text. Not even one of those fake, "sorry, I'm stuck at work" messages she used to send when she still cared about keeping up appearances. The house was too quiet. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sound of my breathing. I could hear the leaves brushing against the windows outside like they were trying to warn me. My mind drifted to the casserole I made. It was her favorite. Or at least it used to be. Now I couldn't even remember the last time she finished a meal I cooked. Her keys jingled. Finally, the front door opened with a creak. She didn't even try to close it quietly. That was new. She used to sneak in like she owed me some explanation. Now she just stomped in like she owned the silence, the night, and everything in between. I stayed in the kitchen in the shadows. I didn't move. I listened to her heels click across the hardwood, stopping in the hallway where I'd left the casserole on the table like some kind of peace offering. "Really, Ethan?" she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Casserole?" Again. She didn't know I was sitting right there. She didn't care. I finally spoke. "You're late." She jumped a little, startled, then rolled her eyes when she saw me. No apology. No guilt. Just that damn attitude she'd been cultivating like a weed over the past year. "Jesus, Ethan, don't do that. You scared me. You said you'd be home by 8. And now it's 11. Relax. I had work. You know, that thing people do to keep the lights on." That was the first lie, and I let it slide. I stood up slowly, the chair groaning under my weight. I walked toward her, trying to see past her smugness, past the thick cloud of some new perfume she'd never worn before. You don't even work late on Thursdays. Her expression froze. Then she tilted her head and smiled, condescending, fake, dripping with something I couldn't name yet. Don't start this again. God, Ethan. You've turned into some paranoid, jealous housewife. Another jab. She used to joke about how predictable I was. Now she used that predictability as a weapon. I didn't respond. Just looked at her. Really looked at her. Her hair was done. Not the usual lazy ponytail. This was curled. Styled. Done with purpose. Her blouse wasn't the boring gray one she usually wore to work. It was tight. Black. Low-cut. New. And there was a faint smudge on her neck. Lipstick, maybe. Or the outline of something kissed and quickly wiped away. Her phone buzzed. She flinched. I didn't ask to see it. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked past her and headed for the hallway closet. She stayed frozen near the table like she didn't know what to expect next. I opened the closet door and pulled out the bag I'd packed a week ago. It wasn't mine. It was hers. I tossed it to her feet. "What the hell is this?" she asked. "Your bag. Go to him." She laughed. But it wasn't real. It was forced. Nervous. The laugh of someone caught too early in a game they thought they were winning. "Ethan, don't be dramatic. Do you love him?" I asked. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then smiled again, slower this time. Define love. That's when I knew I was right. And that I'd been right for a long time. She didn't even bother lying anymore. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of breaking me. Not yet. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the envelope I'd kept under the fruit bowl for the past 3 days, and placed it gently in her hand. She looked down, confused. "This is what you've been waiting for, right? Freedom? A clean slate." She pulled the papers out, read the word divorce, and scoffed. "You really think I care about this piece of paper? You think this scares me?" "No. But what comes tomorrow might." And with that, I turned my back to her and went upstairs. I could hear her whispering something under her breath, but I didn't turn around. I'd planted the seed. And tomorrow, everything she thought she had under control would come crashing down. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to burn her world down. Quietly. Precisely. Completely. And she would never see it coming. She left that night without saying another word. I didn't follow. Didn't ask where she was going. I didn't need to. The stiletto heels, the dressed-up cleavage, the hasty makeup wipe in the bathroom, she wasn't heading to a friend's couch. I stood by the upstairs window, the curtain barely parted, and watched her car reverse out of our driveway like she couldn't get away fast enough. Headlights carved a path through the fog, then disappeared. I stayed up until 3. Not because I was waiting for her. I knew she wouldn't come back. Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either. I just couldn't sleep. The silence of the house felt louder than her betrayal ever had. And for the first time, I truly noticed the emptiness she'd carved into every corner of our home. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't like she woke up one day and turned into this version of herself. No, it had been slow. Calculated. The affection had leaked out of her drop by drop, and like an idiot, I kept mopping up the spill instead of checking where the damn pipe was broken. The next morning, I made coffee. Poured 2 cups out of habit. I stared at hers for a while before pouring it down the sink. At exactly 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then again, 2 minutes later. This time I picked it up and waited. No hello. Just breathing on the other end. And then a voice. "Mr. Parker?" A woman. Calm, professional, clipped. "This is Amy Patterson. I'm Tom Wexler's wife." Boom. My pulse jumped, but I said nothing. "I found your number through an old insurance form. You're married to Melissa, right?" "Yes." "Well, I just thought you should know. Tom's not home, and neither is his phone, but I did find messages. Pictures. From your wife." I could tell she was holding it together with dental floss and rage. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it more than I expected. She let out a short laugh. "Don't be. I'm not calling for comfort. I'm calling because I think we deserve better. Both of us." My grip tightened around the mug. "What are you thinking?" "I have screenshots. Enough to humiliate them in front of whoever they care about." "You want copies?" "I want more than copies. I want them to pay." There was a pause on the line. Like she was measuring me. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. She sent the first batch within 5 minutes. Nude shots. Melissa's face in all of them. Stupid poses. Poses I hadn't seen since our honeymoon, maybe longer. I scrolled through them numbly, feeling less pain and more disgust. Then came the texts. You make me feel like a woman again, not some wife cooking casseroles for a man who can't get it up after 10. He's clueless. I could scream your name in bed and he'd think it was a dream. My vision blurred for a second. But I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I saved the images. Backed up the messages. Moved the entire folder into a hidden drive named Insurance. Then I opened my laptop and started writing. An email to Melissa's boss. A formal letter to our bank, removing her as an authorized user on every shared account. A call to my lawyer to freeze the joint savings. I wasn't going to chase her. I wasn't going to fight for something she'd already burned. I was going to make her regret thinking I'd go down quietly. At 10:47 a.m., the front door burst open. She was crying. Mascara streaked. Hair a mess. Shoes in her hand. She looked like she'd been running through hell barefoot. Ethan, please. She saw the folder open on my laptop. Her eyes widened. And for the first time since this entire mess started, Melissa Parker looked terrified. I didn't stand. I didn't even flinch. I sipped my coffee, then looked up. I know everything, I said. Her bottom lip trembled. It wasn't supposed to. Stop. I raised a finger. This is the part where you listen. Because what happens next will ruin you. And then I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I'd already begun writing her ending. She stood in the doorway like a stray dog, torn up, shaking, no idea what to do next. Her red dress from last night was wrinkled, clinging to her like shame. She had one heel in her hand, the other probably left in whatever hotel hallway she scrambled out of when the fantasy she built came crashing down. For a moment, just a brief, pathetic moment, I almost felt something for her. Pity, maybe. But it evaporated the second she opened her mouth. Ethan, please. It's not what you think. Not what I think. That line? After everything? I pushed my chair back slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of it scrape the hardwood like a warning shot. She flinched. Good. I stood up, took 2 steps toward her, and stopped just close enough to smell the alcohol and cheap motel soap still clinging to her skin. It's exactly what I think, Melissa. You've been screwing your coworker. You thought you were clever. You thought I'd never figure it out. But you're not clever, Melissa. You're sloppy. She opened her mouth to protest again, but I lifted my phone. The screen lit up with a photo of her, half-dressed, tongue out, middle finger pointed at the camera. The timestamp read Thursday, 9:38 p.m. Her eyes widened. I swiped again. Text after text. More pictures. Messages with times. Locations. Explicit details. One message even said, he still thinks I'm working overtime, LOL. Melissa staggered backward like the evidence physically hit her. Where? How did you? Tom's wife found me, I said calmly. Turns out she's not as blind as I was. Melissa dropped her shoe and clutched the wall like she needed it to hold herself together. Her legs were trembling. Her whole body looked like it was rejecting her own choices. I can explain. No, you can't. And I don't care if you could. I walked past her and headed to the hallway closet again. From the top shelf, I pulled down a second envelope. This one heavier. I handed it to her. Inside was everything. A spreadsheet of her late-night absences, screenshots, bank statements showing hundreds of dollars withdrawn near shady hotels, a printed copy of the HR complaint I'd already drafted, and finally, a letter from our joint accountant informing her that her access to all accounts had been revoked. She flipped through it with shaking hands, her breathing growing faster. What is this? She whispered. Consequences. She looked up at me, tears now genuinely streaming down her face. Her lips trembled as she reached for me, but I stepped back. That broke something in her. She dropped the envelope on the floor and collapsed to her knees like her strings had been cut. I made a mistake, she sobbed. Ethan, I was lost, and Tom, he made me feel like I mattered again. She looked up, her mascara-streaked face twisted in desperation. I was lonely, Ethan. You were always at work. You stopped noticing me. I didn't mean to fall for him. There it was. The shift. The pivot. From arrogance to victimhood. From blame to begging. I cooked for you. I stayed faithful when you were late. When you stopped touching me. When you stopped asking how my day was. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just stared at her like she was something under glass at a museum, a relic of a life I used to believe in. You didn't fall for him, Melissa, I said coldly. You fell for the idea of being admired again. But here's the thing. Admiration means nothing when it's built on lies. She reached up to grab my hand. I let her fingers touch mine, just long enough for her to think there was hope. Then I pulled away. She crumpled. I stepped over her and picked up my jacket. I'm heading to the office. There's coffee in the pot. You know how to reheat it. As I walked out, she screamed after me, words I didn't catch. Didn't need to. Because I wasn't done. Not even close. She had no idea what I'd set in motion. And by the time it was over, Melissa Parker wouldn't just be my ex-wife. She'd be the woman who lost everything, reputation, security, dignity, because she thought she could cheat and walk away untouched. But every move she'd made, I was 3 ahead. She didn't leave the house that day. When I got home around 6, the lights were still off. The living room looked untouched. No music, no TV. Just the thick, rotting silence that settles when something dies and no one dares move the body. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was still inside. I found her curled on the couch in the same red dress, now wrinkled and stained, clutching a throw pillow like it could protect her from what she'd become. She didn't look up when I walked in. Didn't speak. But I knew she'd been crying. I said nothing. Just walked past her, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and took it to the back porch where I could think without her stink of regret choking the air. It was cold outside. The kind of biting cold that makes your breath visible and your skin tighten. I liked it. It kept me alert. As I sat there, sipping, I thought about all the things she'd done without thinking I'd notice. All the tiny slips. Like how she stopped wearing the necklace I gave her for our 10th anniversary. Said it didn't match anything anymore. How she suddenly hated the scent of my cologne after loving it for years. How she didn't ask about my day. Ever. But somehow remembered to text him 30 times between noon and 5 p.m. She was predictable in her betrayal. Lazy, even. As if 20 years of building something with me could be undone quietly, conveniently. She thought she'd get away with it. But what she never understood was that I watch. I listen. I remember. Back inside, I heard her finally moving. Slow steps. Like someone walking through the wreckage of their own disaster. I didn't care. What I cared about was the message I got earlier from Tom's wife, Amy. It was a video this time. Grainy footage, probably from a hotel hallway security cam. It showed Melissa and Tom. Kissing. Laughing. Stumbling into room 317 like they were teenagers sneaking out of their parents' house. Timestamp. 2 nights ago. Amy's message was short. Just 5 words. You still want justice? I didn't answer right away. I stared at that message for an hour. Because this wasn't about getting even anymore. It was about building something deliberate. Something clean. Melissa wasn't just going to feel loss. She was going to live in it. She would wake up in it. Drown in it. And Amy? She wanted the same thing. So we met. That Friday. A coffee shop in Midtown. I wore my wedding ring for the last time that day. Amy looked nothing like Melissa. Sharp eyes. Calm voice. No makeup. She didn't flinch when I walked in. Just nodded at the seat across from her. I've done my digging, she said, sliding a file across the table. You'll want to see this. Inside were bank transfers. From Tom to a private account. Melissa's name was on it. They'd been planning something. An apartment lease in her name. A furniture order scheduled for next week. She wasn't just leaving me. She was planning to disappear. That was the part that finally made my hands shake. Because she was going to throw away 2 decades of my life like I was expired milk, quietly and conveniently, and leave. Amy saw my face tighten. She leaned in, her voice low and even. I don't want to humiliate them just to hurt them, she said. I want to cut them off at the knees. Publicly. Financially. Emotionally. I nodded. We do it smart, I said. Not loud. Not fast. But all at once. Amy smiled. For the first time. Like someone who finally found a partner in war. Back home, Melissa was in the kitchen. Cleaning. As if she could scrub the betrayal out of the tile. She looked up when I walked in. I was thinking we could talk, she said softly. Sure. I replied, grabbing a glass of water. Let's talk next week. Next week. Monday. Courtroom 6A. She froze, sponge dripping in her hand. What? I filed. Already. Hearing set. You'll be served officially in the morning, but I thought I'd save you the surprise. She dropped the sponge. Ethan, wait. Please. I wasn't thinking straight. No, I cut in. You were thinking exactly straight. You just thought I'd be dumb enough to stay frozen. She came toward me. I made a mistake. I stared her down. You made a choice. And for the first time in years, I felt free. But she had no idea what was coming next. Because humiliation? That was just the appetizer. The morning she got served was the first time I heard her scream since the miscarriage. But that scream back then came from grief. This one, panic. I was in the kitchen frying eggs when the knock came. Sharp. 3 raps. Melissa had just stepped out of the shower, towel wrapped haphazardly around her, steam still curling out behind her. She opened the door barefoot, annoyed. Can I help you? The woman at the door didn't flinch. Suit. Badge. Clipboard. A face like she delivered bad news before breakfast every day of her life. Melissa Parker? Yes. You've been served. The envelope hit her hand like a stone. She stared at it, blinking, lips parting as if she couldn't quite understand what was happening. Like the betrayal only counted if she delivered it. She didn't turn around when she closed the door. She stood in the hallway, back to me, still holding the envelope like it was hissing in her palm. Then she opened it. Page by page, she unraveled. My voice was calm. You should probably get dressed before you read the last few pages. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were wild. You're divorcing me? She croaked. Did you think I was going to frame the photos and hang them over the fireplace? She clutched the papers, read more, and her breathing started to crack apart. You're demanding full control of the house. Already paid the mortgage off. The title's in my name. The savings. Frozen. You spent $6,000 in 3 weeks. I figured you were warming up for a new life. You're trying to leave me with nothing. I smiled. You started without me. She stumbled toward me, rage replacing whatever shattered guilt had lived in her 5 minutes ago. You bastard. I gave you 20 years. 20 king years. And you sold it for motel sheets and 2-for-1 cocktails. She lunged at me, hands clenched. But I stepped back, calm, collected. Her hands hovered in the air like she didn't know what to do with them. I stared at her. She looked ridiculous. Damp. Disheveled. Broken. You still think you're in control, Melissa. That this is just another fight. That you can cry, scream, throw something, and I'll bend. She was breathing hard now, chest rising and falling. I loved you, she whispered. Even when I was with him, I still. Don't finish that sentence, I warned. It'll only make me hate you more. She collapsed onto the bar stool, arms limp, face buried in her hands. I didn't comfort her. I didn't feel sorry. But I did watch. Closely. Because now came the unraveling. Later that afternoon, I met Amy again. Different place this time. Her car. Black Range Rover, tinted windows. We parked in the far corner of the grocery store lot where no one cared about what 2 strangers might be scheming. She handed me a burner phone. Photos, videos, screenshots, all loaded. Everything backed up to encrypted cloud storage. Press this, she tapped the power button, and everything we've got on them can be emailed anonymously. To HR, family, church, friends, whoever you want. I turned it over in my hand. You sure you want this to go nuclear? I asked. She didn't blink. Tom's mother thinks I'm the reason their marriage is struggling. Maybe she needs to see her precious boy in action, plowing your wife on camera. I gave a low, bitter laugh. Amy had turned a corner. Whatever softness she had when we met was gone now, replaced by a steel I understood. We went over the plan. Step 1, the court. In motion. Step 2, exposure. Precise. Controlled. Step 3, reputation. Gone. Each step designed to take from them what they'd try to take from us. Security, dignity, and peace. Back home, Melissa had changed into sweatpants and one of my old college hoodies, the irony of which almost made me laugh. She was sitting in the living room, phone in hand, scrolling desperately, calling friends, crying into voicemails. She was trying to find a lifeline, but the calls went unanswered. Because I'd gotten there first. Messages had already been sent. carefully written ones. Not slander, just truth. Just enough truth to make sure nobody rushed to rescue her. By sundown, she was alone, and the walls were closing in. I could see it on her face. She wasn't grieving the loss of me. She was grieving the loss of options. And that's when I knew she was starting to feel it. The fall. But it was only the beginning. That night, I didn't sleep upstairs. I stayed in the guest room. First time in 20 years I'd chosen to sleep somewhere else in my own house, and somehow, I slept better. Melissa didn't knock. Didn't call for me. She stayed in the master bedroom like a ghost haunting the life she killed. I imagined her lying awake, staring at the ceiling, rereading the divorce petition like it might suddenly rewrite itself if she blinked enough. The next morning, she tried to pretend the world hadn't shifted beneath her feet. She came downstairs in a robe, hair brushed, a fresh layer of concealer smeared under her eyes. "Morning," she said, voice all sugar, like it could hide the poison. I didn't respond. I sipped my coffee, looked right past her. She hovered awkwardly at the counter, waiting for me to give her something: pity, anger, conversation, anything. I gave her silence. That did more damage than shouting ever could. She finally sat across from me. "I've been thinking." Dangerous start. I braced for the lie. "I don't want to fight you in court," she continued, fake calm. "This can be clean. Quiet. We can talk through the settlement ourselves, no lawyers." Ah, there it was. I tilted my head, set the mug down slowly. "Why? Because you think I'll give you more than the judge will?" "No. Because it's humiliating." I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You weren't worried about humiliation when you were sending naked pictures to a married man from our living room while I was at work." She flinched. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "I just want peace, Ethan. Peace left when you unzipped your dignity in a Motel 6. Silence. Thick. She stood up slowly, hands clenched. "You're not a saint, Ethan. You haven't been a husband in years." I laughed. "And you haven't been a wife in 10. The only difference is, I didn't use that as a reason to screw someone else's husband and then try to walk away like a victim." She stormed off, slammed the door to the bedroom. She thought she could rattle me, but I wasn't the man she used to manipulate. Not anymore. A few hours later, Amy texted, "Check your email. You'll like what you see." I opened the attachment. A full transcript of Tom's latest message to Melissa. "Can't meet you this weekend. Amy's on my ass about everything. She's suspicious. Just lay low. Let me handle her. You're everything to me. I'll leave her soon. I promise." I laughed out loud. Same tired script. Same greasy promise. He wasn't going to leave Amy. He was terrified of Amy. I picked up my phone and sent a reply. Time to send her the video. Amy replied with a thumbs up. And just like that, the next fuse was lit. I knew exactly what she was going to do. Amy didn't play games, she played chess. She scheduled the email to go out at 5 p.m. To Tom's church committee, to his law firm's board of directors, to his sister, his mother, his golf buddies. One click. That was all. Melissa had no idea the blast radius was expanding. At dinner, she cooked spaghetti, her version of a peace treaty. She set the plate in front of me with shaking hands. "I want to talk. Really talk." I looked at the plate, then at her. "You talked when you were in his arms." I got up, tossed the food in the trash, and left the kitchen. 10 minutes later, from the upstairs hallway, I heard her phone buzz violently. Then again, and then screaming. Not loud, not theatrical, just one raw, broken sound, like she'd been shot. I waited, calm. I knew what she was seeing. The fallout. The exposed affair. Tom's collapse. The one thing she never expected was public humiliation. She wanted to keep the fantasy quiet, controlled. But now everyone knew. Our friends. Her coworkers. His church. Melissa Parker was now officially the other woman. I heard her running. Upstairs. Frantic. Closet doors slamming. Drawers yanked open. I walked upstairs and leaned on the doorway as she tossed clothes into a duffel bag. "You're running?" I asked. She spun around, red-eyed, hair wild. "You ruined my life." "No. I just revealed it. I have nowhere to go. You had a man. Where is he now?" She choked, stared at me like she wanted to kill me, and begged me all at once. I crossed my arms. "You want to know the worst part?" She didn't answer. "You're not even mad about what you did." You're just mad you got caught. I turned and walked away, her sobs echoing off the hallway walls. By morning, she'd be gone. But I wasn't finished. Not until she felt everything I'd felt, stripped, alone, unwanted, and discarded, piece by piece. She left before sunrise. I didn't hear the door, didn't hear the engine start. Only realized she was gone when I walked into the kitchen and saw the note on the counter, scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. I just need time to think. I'll call when I'm ready to talk. There was no signature, no apology, no return date, just silence. I stood there staring at that pathetic excuse for a farewell and felt nothing. Not relief, not rage, just readiness. That day, I didn't go to work. Took the day off. Not for grief, not for healing, for strategy. Melissa had always been tactical with her lies, planting them quietly, watering them in the dark, hoping I'd never come with a flashlight. But now it was my turn to move in the shadows. I pulled up the financial reports from the forensic accountant I'd hired 6 weeks earlier. A man named Kirk, ex-IRS. Quiet. Ruthless. He'd found things I hadn't even thought to look for. 2 credit cards in her name I didn't know about. One was used almost exclusively at hotels and salons near Tom's downtown condo. The other? Maxed out. All within the last 4 months. Jewelry. Designer heels. Plane tickets that were never used. The kicker? The flight was to Phoenix. Round trip. I called Kirk. Did she go? No, he said. But she was planning to. Alone. No. The second ticket was in Tom's name. I sat back in my chair and let that register. They weren't just cheating. They were plotting. A full escape. A new city. A fresh start. Together. She was ready to vanish with him. And she would have, if I hadn't caught her first. I opened my laptop and went into the shared drive I created, the one Amy and I used to collect and exchange everything. I uploaded the latest bank scans, tax evasion flags, potential fraud. Amy added her own files 20 minutes later. Audio this time. Recordings of Tom on the phone, bragging to a friend about how she's leaving her boring-ass husband, and I'm next once I get Amy off my back. He even laughed. I'll be divorced by October and balls deep in Melissa every damn night. Mark my words. That file? I forwarded it to Melissa's father. He was old school. Navy vet. Conservative to the core. Worshipped the idea of marriage like it was a religion. The man had hugged me tighter at our wedding than he ever hugged Melissa. I attached no message. Just the audio. Let her explain that at Sunday dinner. 2 hours later, Amy texted me. It started. I refreshed Facebook. Tom's sister had posted a cryptic status. Some people burn the whole house down and expect applause. Not today. His mother replied with a broken heart emoji. One of their friends tagged Tom with a comment. You're disgusting. You had a perfect life. The dominoes were falling fast. At noon, I got a call. Unknown number. I answered. It was Melissa. She sounded wrecked. Like she hadn't slept, eaten, or blinked since the bomb dropped. Why would you send that to my father? She asked, her voice small, trembling. You mean the truth? I asked. Because I was done letting you lie without consequence. You don't know what it's like to live with regret. Then get used to it. She started crying. He won't speak to me. My own dad won't pick up my calls. I said nothing. Let the silence do the work. I lost my job too, she added after a pause. HR said they're reviewing my contract. They think I violated policy. They saw the emails. I let that hang in the air. You humiliated me, she whispered. No, Melissa, I said slowly, coldly. You humiliated yourself. I just held up the mirror. She tried to recover. Can we talk? In person? I want to fix this. Fix. She wanted to fix the marriage she smashed with her bare hands. The same marriage she planned to abandon like a bad lease. Where are you? I asked. Silence. I'm staying at a friend's, she said finally. A girlfriend? Another silence. No. Tom. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. You're still with him? No. I mean, we're not together. He let me crash on his couch. Amy threw all his crap onto the lawn. He said I could stay a few days. I cut her off. You're pathetic. You don't mean that. I mean every damn word. I hung up. Then I blocked her. For the first time, it felt final. Like the cord had snapped, and there was no tying it back together. But I wasn't done yet. There were still strings to pull. Secrets she didn't know I had. Because Melissa thought public shame was the worst it could get. She had no idea what part 2 of my plan looked like. She would. Very soon. Melissa came back 2 days later. Not with flowers. Not with tears. With a duffel bag. Dragging it behind her like a dog that had been kicked too many times but didn't know where else to go. I was outside, fixing the front gate, something I'd been meaning to do for months, but life and lies had kept getting in the way. She stood at the edge of the walkway, unsure if she should take another step. Wind tugged at her hair, and the shadows under her eyes looked like bruises. Her pride was deflated, and that scared me more than her anger ever did. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said quietly. I looked up from the screwdriver. Tom got tired of sharing his couch? She didn't answer, but her silence was loud enough. I stood, wiped my hands on my jeans. "Why are you really here, Melissa?" She blinked at me like she hadn't heard the question, like she wasn't ready for the possibility that I wouldn't just let her back in. "I'm your wife." "No, you were my wife. Now you're a stranger with too many secrets and a bad taste in men." "Ethan, please. You're humiliating me." I stepped closer. "No, Melissa. You did that yourself when you sent a video of your chest to a man whose wife was baking cookies in the next room." Her jaw tightened. The tears didn't come. Maybe they'd all dried up. Or maybe she realized they stopped working on me weeks ago. She reached into the duffel and pulled out a thick envelope. "What's this?" I asked. She handed it over. My offer. Inside were her terms. Her signature. A proposal to settle. She was offering to walk away from everything. No alimony. No fight. Just gone. I should have felt vindicated. But instead, I felt cautious. Melissa never gave anything away unless there was something she wanted more. "What's the catch?" I asked. Her voice was low. "My dad won't talk to me. My friends won't return my texts. I can't get another job in the city without someone looking at me like I have a scarlet letter stamped on my forehead." She looked up, desperate. "I need time to disappear. Somewhere quiet. I just want this over with. I won't fight the court. Just give me a clean break. A clean break. After 20 years of marriage. After affairs, lies, betrayal, and carefully laid destruction." She wanted to walk, but she didn't know what I had planned. Not yet. I took the envelope, glanced over the terms, and nodded slowly. "Fine. You'll get your clean break," I said. Her eyes flickered with something, hope, maybe. "But first," I added, "you're going to come with me. Right now." Her expression changed. "Where?" "You said you want this over. Let's make it official." I walked to the truck, opened the passenger door. She hesitated. "Ethan, what's going on?" "No more games. Either get in or walk away. Your choice." She stood there for a second. Then curiosity and pride tangled around her ankles like chains. She climbed in. We drove in silence. Not downtown. Not to the courthouse. To a small office building in the industrial district. Low traffic. No cameras. Just a gray door with one word printed on it. Mediation. She froze when she read it. "You're bringing lawyers into this?" "No. Not mine." I knocked twice. The door opened. Inside sat 2 men and 1 woman at a long table, folders stacked in front of them. Melissa turned to me. "What is this?" I stepped past her and sat down. "This," I said, "is every lie you've ever told, every dollar you've ever funneled, every private account you never thought I'd find, documented. Verified. Admissible." One of the men slid a folder toward her. She opened it. Her hand started to shake. The woman at the table spoke calmly. "Mrs. Parker, you're being presented with an option. Accept full settlement release in exchange for immunity from financial fraud pursuit. Or we let the court see everything." Melissa looked like her lungs were collapsing. You wouldn't." "I already have," I said. "This is your last exit before the truck hits." She didn't speak for a long time. Just sat there, staring at her past in bullet points and bank ledgers. Then she signed. Quick, angry strokes. A broken signature. When we walked out, the air felt different. She glanced at me, defeated. "Why did you do all this?" I turned to her, dead calm. "Because you didn't just cheat on me, Melissa. You humiliated me. And now? Now you'll spend the next decade answering to that humiliation." She didn't follow me to the car. She stood there in the parking lot, clutching her bag, watching me drive away like a woman who just realized the fire she started had burned her house down. And I wasn't finished yet. Because revenge? Revenge was still waiting to take its final bow. 3 days passed. No calls. No messages. No desperate voicemails choking on regret. She'd vanished like a storm that tore through a town and left behind splinters. But I knew better. Melissa wasn't gone. She was watching. Waiting. Somewhere out there, she was nursing the wounds to her ego, not her heart. Calculating the damage. Deciding if there was still a way to twist her way back into my life or someone else's. But I had no interest in where she went. I was already looking ahead. It was time for phase 3. I stood in the master bedroom, the one she used to rule like a spoiled queen, and began the purge. Everything. Gone. Every photo. Every letter. Every trace of her filtered smile in those carefully curated frames. The donation boxes filled quickly, dresses she hadn't worn for years, the designer bags I'd bought on our anniversaries, thinking I was spoiling a wife when in reality I was feeding a snake. Her perfume. Burned it. I even removed the bed. Replaced it with a sleeker, darker frame. A new mattress. New sheets. No trace of her scent left. No memory to crawl under my skin while I slept. That night, I opened the email draft I'd saved for weeks. Subject line: regarding Melissa Parker's prior involvement in the Wexler case. Recipient: a senior partner at her former law firm. The one that was quietly investigating Tom's misconduct. Attached: screenshots, logs, the spreadsheet of her complicit withdrawals. Enough to make her radioactive to any firm with a shred of dignity. But I didn't send it. Not yet. I just wanted her to know I could. And that's when I got the message. Anonymous number. Untraceable. But the words were hers. Please don't destroy me. I made mistakes. I don't deserve this. Short. Cowardly. I read it twice. Then deleted it. I had already warned her. But she hadn't felt the final sting yet. So I sent one text. Not to her. To Amy. It's time. I want them in the same room. Her reply came 30 seconds later. Sunday. 4 p.m. Old Glass House. I'll handle it. The Glass House was a greenhouse-turned venue in the edge of town, where Amy's family used to host fundraisers. Now it was empty. Cold. Abandoned. Perfect. Sunday came. I arrived early. Amy was already inside, setting the stage like it was theater. 2 chairs. 1 camera. A folder on the table. A single recording device, light blinking red. This'll be the final cut, Amy said, her voice smooth. She'll try to talk her way out. He'll try to lie. You sit. You say nothing until it's time. At 3:58 p.m., Melissa arrived. She looked older, paler, dressed in a neutral gray coat, hair tied back like she was trying to make herself smaller. Tom arrived 1 minute later. He looked like hell. Eyes baggy. Jaw clenched. A man whose walls were closing in from all sides. He stopped short when he saw me. Then saw Melissa. Why the hell are we here? He hissed. Melissa looked between us, confused, wary. What is this? Amy stepped forward. Calm. Professional. Unforgiving. You both owe people answers. So you're going to sit, and you're going to talk. On record. Or I'll send everything we have to everyone who signs your paychecks. Neither moved. Then slowly, Melissa sat. Tom followed. The camera blinked on. And I sat back in the shadows, watching. Melissa started first. Tom, why didn't you tell me you were lying about the divorce? He shifted. I wasn't lying. I just needed time. Time, she snapped. You let me burn my life down. For you. Tom scoffed. You were already burning. I just didn't stop you. She slapped the table. I left everything. He laughed bitterly. You left a husband who actually loved you. For me? I never asked for that. You came running. Melissa blinked. Stunned. Amy leaned in. Keep going. Tom turned to me then, eyes narrow. This is your revenge fantasy, huh? I didn't answer. He looked back at Melissa. You were easy. You made it too easy. A few compliments and you threw away 20 years. That's not my fault. Her face collapsed. Not from heartbreak. From humiliation. Tom stood. I'm done. This was pointless. He turned to leave. Amy didn't stop him. Melissa didn't speak. She just sat there, shoulders shaking. Finally realizing the man she burned her life for never planned to catch her. When the door shut behind him, I stood and walked forward. I picked up the folder from the table and dropped it in front of her. She looked up at me. What is it now? I stared into her. The full report. Everything. I was going to send it to every firm in the city. She looked down. Silent. But I'm not. Her eyes widened slightly. You're not. No. Because your punishment is better this way. She blinked, confused. You don't get to vanish. You don't get a clean slate. You'll live with this. Every room you walk into. Every interview you take. Every sideways glance when someone recognizes your name. That's your prison. I turned and walked out of the glass house into the golden evening light. The air felt clean. She had nothing left, and I had no more to take. But the final blow? That was still to come. I didn't go home right away. I drove for hours. Through the back roads, past the old mill, through neighborhoods where porch lights were already flickering on and kids were chasing each other barefoot through the fading daylight. I wasn't lost. I just didn't feel like returning to a house that finally belonged to me again. Empty, yes, but clean. Quiet. Mine. That night, I pulled into a gas station off the interstate. Bought a soda I didn't want, just to have an excuse to stand there in the parking lot and breathe. That's when my phone buzzed again. Amy. She's trying to file a harassment claim. Thought you should know. I laughed. A short, dry sound that startled even me. Melissa had crawled back into victim mode. Of course she had. She always needed to be someone's wounded bird. But this time, no one was interested in saving her. Amy sent another message. Don't worry. We've got the recording. Her lies are buried under her own voice. It was done. She couldn't twist the story anymore. Couldn't cry her way into another version of the truth. Not with half the city now knowing who she really was. But there was one thing left. Something I hadn't told anyone. Not even Amy. A final card I'd kept pressed to my chest, waiting for just the right moment. You see, 3 months before everything went to hell, Melissa had come to me with a request. I want to invest, she said, eyes full of ambition and just a hint of manipulation. There's a startup I believe in. I want to put in $10,000 from our emergency fund. We'll double it in 6 months, Ethan, I swear. At the time, I was tired, buried in deadlines. I'd nodded, distracted. Yeah, okay. Pull it from the savings. Just keep the receipts. She never kept the receipts. But I did. Because the startup didn't exist. It was a shell company, registered under a fake LLC in Nevada. And guess whose name was on the paperwork as a silent partner? Melissa Parker. I hadn't said a word when I found out. Hadn't accused her. I wanted to see where it would lead. Turns out, it led straight to Tom. The fake company was a cover for siphoning funds, his way of hiding income from his wife, from taxes, and from me. And Melissa had signed. Blindly. Willingly. So while she was out there crying about reputations and betrayal, she didn't know she'd stepped into felony territory. I'd hired Kirk, my forensic guy, to quietly compile everything. The paper trail. The wire transfers. Even the hidden USB drive Tom used to log fake invoices. It was all mine now. And I hadn't decided yet what I was going to do with it. Until that moment. In the gas station parking lot, under the flickering fluorescent lights, with the cool bottle of soda sweating in my hand, I made my choice. I sent one message. Not to Amy. Not to Melissa. But to the district attorney's office. I have evidence of fraudulent financial activity involving 2 parties, Melissa Parker and Thomas Wexler. Documents attached. Happy to cooperate. I hit send. The email disappeared into the system. A match tossed into dry grass. I didn't smile. There was no joy in it. Only closure. She had walked into the fire. Tom had handed her the torch. And now they'd answer for what they tried to build on the ashes of our marriage. When I pulled back onto the road, my chest felt lighter. Not because revenge was sweet, but because truth, the whole truth, had finally found daylight. At home, I opened the front door to the smell of fresh paint. I'd redone the living room a week ago. New furniture. New photos on the shelves, ones of me, my parents, my brother, a fishing trip from '06. Nothing fake. Nothing posed. And no Melissa. Her ghost was finally gone. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, sat on the new couch, and waited. Because part 10 was never going to be loud. It was the silence before the final crash. The calm before 2 people who thought they could lie and their way through life were about to learn what justice really tastes like. And when that phone rings, when the words formal investigation enter her perfect little world, I won't gloat. I'll just nod. And finally, exhale. The phone rang at 7:43 a.m. I was in the middle of slicing an orange when I saw the name flash across the screen. Detective M. Garrison. Didn't hesitate. Didn't even blink. I wiped the juice from my fingers and answered. Mr. Parker, the voice was firm, clipped. We've received and reviewed the materials you submitted. They match information from an open investigation we've been building on Mr. Wexler. But your wife's, Melissa Parker's, name appears repeatedly on several of the fraudulent transfers. We'd like you to come in this afternoon for a formal statement. I didn't smile. I just said, of course. I'll be there. Then I poured my orange juice and sat down to drink it in silence. That same morning, across town, Melissa was waking up in Tom's apartment, where she'd been crashing since the fallout began. Except this time, she didn't wake to birds or coffee. She woke to two sharp knocks at the door. Tom answered it, groggy, still wearing yesterday's shirt. And there they were, two plainclothes officers with badges and grim expressions. Thomas Wexler? Yes. You're under investigation for financial fraud, falsifying tax documents, and wire misrepresentation. We'll need to take a statement today. Your legal counsel has already been contacted. Behind him, Melissa stood frozen, her mouth ajar. And then they said it. We'll be needing a statement from Ms. Parker as well. Her name appears on multiple suspicious transfers and contractual documents. Her knees buckled. She didn't fall, but something in her did. That was the moment I had been waiting for. Not a scream. Not a scene. A collapse of certainty. The instant she realized this wasn't a dramatic breakup story she could twist to friends later, this was criminal. Amy texted me at 9:12 a.m. It's happening. They came for both. You broke them. I didn't reply. She didn't need to hear anything. The silence was the victory. At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into the precinct with my folder, neatly organized, timestamps and signatures highlighted, backup USB drive in my coat pocket. They brought coffee. I didn't touch it. I gave my statement. Clear. Calm. Clean. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The evidence told the story. Detective Garrison looked me in the eye when it was over. We may not be able to charge them both, depending on how the cards fall, he said. But this was good work. You've done more than some of our investigators in 3 months. I nodded once. Outside, the air was crisp. Brisk wind. Sunlight breaking through the overcast. I sat in my car and waited. 5 minutes later, the call came. Amy. They arrested Tom, she said. Took him out of the office in cuffs. The board fired him on the spot. It's all over the firm group chat. And Melissa? She's not in jail. Yet. But she's been summoned. She lawyered up quick. Word is her dad's not helping with legal fees. He told her, you made your bed. Lay in it. That hit me harder than I expected. Not out of pity, but because even he finally saw her for what she was. Amy paused. You okay? I'm clear, I said. Finally. She didn't ask for more. Just said, let me know when you're ready for a drink. First round's on me. I hung up and stared out the windshield. Tom's life was over. His reputation? Ruined. He'd be lucky to flip burgers after this. And Melissa? Melissa was cornered. The confident, flirty, manipulative woman who once looked me in the eye and said, you're no longer useful to me, now drowning in legal bills, no friends, no career, no lover willing to take the fall for her. She hadn't even called. Not since that morning. Maybe her lawyer told her not to. Or maybe she finally realized there was nothing left to say. But I had one last thing left. One final nail. I went home, poured a glass of bourbon, sat at the table, and opened the old wedding album. Not out of nostalgia, but because I needed to see it, her, as she once was. The girl I'd married. The girl who looked at me like I was the center of her world. And then I burned the album. Every page. Every photo. Watched it turn to smoke and ash in the fireplace. And when the last flame flickered out, I leaned back, heart still. The reckoning was done. The war was won. But one last conversation still waited for me. And that would come tomorrow. Face to face. Her. Me. And the final truth. She asked to meet at the park. Not a coffee shop. Not a lawyer's office. A park. The same one where we used to bring takeout on Friday nights, back when loving her felt like breathing. before she traded that air for smoke. I didn't say yes right away. I let her message sit unread for 2 hours. Then I replied with 2 words, 1 hour. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a worn wooden bench near the duck pond, clutching a paper cup like it could shield her from what was coming. Her hair was tied back too tight, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept since the storm broke. Probably hadn't. There was no makeup, no smug smirk, no designer heels. Just her. In the ruins. I walked up slowly, hands in my coat pockets, stopped a few feet away. No hug. No handshake. No hello. She spoke first. I heard about Tom. Her voice was barely a whisper. His arraignment's scheduled for next month. He's blaming me. Said I tricked him into the fake accounts. Told the lawyers I was obsessed. She laughed once, bitter. He said I chased him. I didn't flinch. She looked up at me, eyes shining, but not with tears. With something raw. Regret? Maybe. Shame? Possibly. Too late either way. I'm probably going to lose my license, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. My name's on everything. The accounts. The false claims. Some of the emails were sent from my IP. I said nothing. She exhaled, slowly. I thought about running. Leaving the state. Starting over somewhere no one knows me. You won't get far, I said. You never could read a map. Her lips curved just slightly, then dropped again. I deserve this, she whispered. All of it. Finally, some truth. But I didn't give her comfort. I didn't offer forgiveness. That wasn't why I came. She looked at me then, fully, her eyes searching. Why did you wait so long to burn it all down? Because I loved you, I said, calm, level. And love makes a man stupid, patient, hopeful. But once it dies, there's nothing left to hold back the fire. She swallowed hard, looked down at her coffee. Did I ever really matter to you? She asked, voice cracking. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence breathe between us. Then I said, you mattered to the man I used to be, not to the one sitting here now. She nodded slowly. I deserve that. Another pause. Why did you agree to this meeting? She asked finally. I stepped closer, reached into my coat, pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. Because you never signed this. I placed it on the bench between us. She looked down. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened it. Final divorce decree. Signed by me. Approved by the court. Missing only her signature to finalize the complete dissolution of our marriage, assets, and legal ties. I gave you more time than you deserved, I said. But today, this ends. You leave with nothing. No alimony. No house. No savings. And no second chance to twist this around. She stared at it. I already signed the mediation agreement. This is the full release, I replied. No loopholes. No contact. No appeals. You signed this, and I forget you existed. Her eyes glistened, not with hope, but with understanding. She pulled a pen from her coat pocket, clicked it slowly, and signed. No flourish. No hesitation. Just a signature. Final. Dry. Dead. I picked up the paper, folded it, and turned to leave. Ethan, she called after me. I stopped. She stood. If I ever meant anything, even for a moment, tell me what you think of me now. I turned my head slightly, just enough so she could see the cold in my eyes. I think you're a warning, I said. A story men tell themselves to remember who not to trust. And I hope you remember my silence more than you ever remembered my love. And I walked away. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because when a man reclaims his soul from the woman who tried to hollow it out, there's no mourning left. Only peace. And peace never begs.